What if SpongeBob had never gotten his job at the Krusty Krab? What if Plankton had actually succeeded in stealing the secret formula? What if Patrick was actually smart? These mind-blowing scenarios could have completely changed SpongeBob history forever. Today we're exploring the biggest what-if moments that would have sent the entire series down a totally different path. Which alternate timeline would shock you the most? Let's find out! Before we get started with the first what if, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Now let's dive right into our first massive what if scenario. What if SpongeBob never got hired at the Krusty Krab? This single change would have completely destroyed the SpongeBob universe as we know it, turning our favorite optimistic sponge into a wandering soul without purpose. We all remember that pivotal moment in the very first episode, Help Wanted, where SpongeBob walks into the Krusty Krab with dreams bigger than his pineapple house. Mr. Krabs and Squidward are skeptical about this overly enthusiastic yellow sponge who's practically vibrating with excitement. They send him on what they think is an impossible mission, finding a spatula, hoping he'll just give up and leave them alone. But SpongeBob finds a hydrodynamic spatula with port and starboard attachments and a turbo drive. He proves himself by feeding a horde of hungry anchovies, and boom, he's hired on the spot. But what if things had gone differently? What if SpongeBob had failed that test? What if Mr. Krabs had simply said no from the start? What if that spatula store had been closed that day? The entire SpongeBob universe would have collapsed like a house of cards, and honestly, it's kind of terrifying to think about. Here's where things get really wild. Without his job at the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob would have been stuck in an endless cycle of unemployment, desperately searching for purpose in his life. Think about it, his entire identity revolves around being the best fry cook in Bikini Bottom. Take that away, and you've got a completely different character. SpongeBob would probably have spent his days wandering around town, still annoyingly optimistic, but with nowhere to channel that energy. He'd likely have become one of those people who tries a million different jobs, but never finds their calling. Maybe he would have worked at the Chum Bucket, imagine Plankton actually getting a competent employee for once. Or perhaps he'd have joined the jellyfish fields as a full-time jellyfishing guide. But here's the kicker without SpongeBob at the Krusty Krab. The entire ecosystem of Bikini Bottom would have shifted dramatically. Mr. Krabs would have had to settle for mediocre employees who actually expect fair wages and reasonable working hours. The horror. Squidward would have been stuck with coworkers who might actually be worse than SpongeBob, making him realize that maybe that annoying yellow sponge wasn't so bad after all. This scenario reveals something pretty dark about the SpongeBob universe that most people don't want to admit. SpongeBob's happiness is entirely dependent on a job where he's massively underpaid and overworked by a boss who sees him as nothing more than a money-making machine. Strip away the colorful animation and silly jokes, and you've got a pretty depressing commentary on how society trains us to find fulfillment through exploitation. Without the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob would have been forced to confront the reality that his dream job might not exist, or worse, that his skills aren't actually that valuable in the real world. We see glimpses of this in episodes where SpongeBob temporarily loses his job, he becomes genuinely depressed and loses his sense of identity. The guy literally doesn't know who he is without his spatula and his grill. The scariest part, SpongeBob might have actually been happier in the long run. Think about all the stress, the crazy customers, the constant chaos at the Krusty Krab. Maybe he would have found a more balanced life, developed other interests, even learned to set boundaries. But the show would never explore that possibility because it would mean admitting that the foundation of SpongeBob's character, his unwavering dedication to a thankless job, might actually be kind of toxic. This also exposes how fragile the entire social structure of Bikini Bottom really is. SpongeBob is the glue that holds multiple relationships together. His friendship with Patrick is partly based on their shared immaturity, but also on SpongeBob having a stable routine that gives Patrick something to disrupt. His dynamic with Sandy often revolves around war-related adventures or him taking breaks from work to hang out with her. Even the show's villains depend on SpongeBob being at the Krusty Krab. Plankton's entire existence revolves around stealing the Krabby Patty formula, but if SpongeBob wasn't there making perfect patties every day, would the Krabby Patty even be worth stealing? The Dirty Bubble and Man Ray might never have encountered SpongeBob and Patrick if they weren't on their way to or from work adventures. The ripple effects would have been massive. No SpongeBob at the Krusty Krab means no iconic episodes like Pizza Delivery, Graveyard Shift, or Band Geeks. Well, at least not in the way we know them. The entire trajectory of the series would have been completely different, probably focusing more on SpongeBob's home life and his relationships with his neighbors. But here's what really gets me. SpongeBob might have actually grown as a character. Hear me out. Most of his character development gets reset every episode because he needs to maintain that same enthusiastic fry cook persona. Without that job defining him, he might have been forced to develop other aspects of his personality, maybe even become more mature and self-aware. The show creators probably never intended for us to think this deeply about SpongeBob's employment situation, but when you really break it down, his job at the Krusty Krab is both his greatest blessing and his biggest curse. It gives him purpose, but also traps him in a cycle of childlike dependency on external validation. Without his Krusty Krab job, SpongeBob would have had to face the harsh reality that most adults deal with finding meaning in life beyond work. He might have discovered that his worth isn't tied to how many patties he can flip, or how much money he can make for Mr. Krabs. Maybe he would have learned to value himself for who he is rather than what he does. The friendship dynamics would have changed completely too. Gary might have gotten more attention from his owner instead of being left alone all day. SpongeBob's relationship with his parents might have developed differently if he wasn't constantly bragging about being Employee of the Month. Even his annoying behavior towards Squidward might have been less intense if he wasn't hyped up on work-related adrenaline all the time. But let's be real, this alternate timeline probably would have made for terrible television. A SpongeBob who's still searching for his purpose, dealing with rejection, and facing the mundane reality of job hunting? That's not exactly the lighthearted escapism that made the show a global phenomenon. The creators needed SpongeBob to have that stable job to build the show's foundation around, even if that foundation is built on some pretty questionable employment practices. The most tragic part is that SpongeBob never even considers other options. He's so fixated on the Krusty Krab that he can't imagine finding fulfillment anywhere else. Maybe if he'd been rejected, he would have discovered something even better. A career that actually appreciated his unique talents and paid him fairly for his hard work. Next time you watch those early episodes, pay attention to how desperately SpongeBob wants that job and ask yourself, is this really a happy ending or is it the beginning of a beautiful tragedy? What do you think SpongeBob would have become if he'd been forced to find his own path instead of falling into the first job that would have him? Would he have been better off, or would Bikini Bottom have lost its most essential resident? The more I think about it, the more I realize that SpongeBob never getting hired might have been the best thing that could have happened to him and the worst thing that could have happened to the show. Sometimes the path not taken is the one that leads to actual growth, even if it makes for less entertaining television. Now let's move on to one of the biggest friendship shakeups in cartoon history. What if SpongeBob never became friends with Patrick? This friendship basically built the entire show. SpongeBob and Patrick represent that pure childhood bond where you can be completely yourself without any judgment. Take that away, and you're left with a totally different SpongeBob, probably more mature, definitely more responsible, but way less fun. The whole dynamic changes when you look at Tea at the Tree Dome. SpongeBob meets this land squirrel named Sandy who wears an air helmet underwater. When he tells Patrick about Sandy's hat full of air, Patrick completely misses the point and thinks she's being fancy, or putting on airs. His brilliant solution? SpongeBob needs to act fancy too by keeping his pinky up the whole time. This advice almost kills SpongeBob. He sits in Sandy's air-filled dome, slowly dehydrating and turning into a shriveled mess, but he keeps that pinky up because Patrick told him to. Without Patrick's influence, SpongeBob probably would have just been honest about needing water. He might have had a normal, safe conversation with Sandy instead of nearly dying from stubbornness. But that's exactly the point. Patrick's terrible advice forces SpongeBob into these ridiculous situations that show us who he really is. SpongeBob values friendship so much that he'll follow Patrick's guidance even when it's literally killing him. That loyalty and trust defines his character throughout the entire series. Patrick also rushes into the dome to save SpongeBob from social embarrassment, not realizing the actual danger. When he starts suffocating too, he screams, "What kind of place is this?" This shows that despite being incredibly dumb, Patrick genuinely cares about his friend. Without this relationship, SpongeBob loses his most loyal supporter and biggest enabler. SpongeBob's personality gets shaped by Patrick's childlike wonder and complete lack of awareness. Patrick encourages every impulsive, naive thought SpongeBob has. Remove Patrick, and SpongeBob probably becomes this responsible, mature character who thinks before acting. Sounds good in theory, but it kills what makes SpongeBob special, that eternal optimism and ability to find magic in everything. The work situation changes completely too. Patrick constantly distracts SpongeBob from his job at the Krusty Krab, dragging him on adventures that take them far from work. Without these interruptions, SpongeBob becomes the perfect employee always on time, never distracted, completely focused. But his Krabby Patties lose that special ingredient that comes from joy and spontaneity. They're technically perfect, but emotionally empty. Squidward's life gets flipped upside down as well. He spends most episodes complaining about SpongeBob and Patrick's noise and chaos. Without Patrick, Squidward finally gets the peace he always wanted. But here's the twist. This might make him even more miserable. The constant annoyance gives Squidward purpose, something to blame for his unhappiness. Without it, he's forced to confront the real issue, his own inability to find joy in anything. The comedic structure of the entire show depends on SpongeBob and Patrick's conversations. Patrick misunderstands basic concepts while SpongeBob tries explaining them, leading to absurd conclusions that drive the plot. Without Patrick's unique brand of stupidity, the show needs to find humor elsewhere. Maybe SpongeBob develops different relationships, but none would have the same pure, chaotic energy. Patrick represents unconditional acceptance in SpongeBob's life. He never judges SpongeBob for being enthusiastic about work or considers him weird for loving everything. This acceptance lets SpongeBob be completely authentic. Without Patrick's support, SpongeBob might develop self-doubt or try changing himself to fit in with others who have expectations. The problem-solving dynamic disappears too. Patrick's suggestions usually backfire spectacularly, but they force SpongeBob to think creatively and consider wild alternatives. Even when Patrick's ideas fail, they often reveal new aspects of whatever challenge they're facing. Without this chaotic brainstorming partner, SpongeBob approaches problems more conventionally and misses creative solutions. From a deeper perspective, Patrick keeps SpongeBob connected to childhood innocence. While other characters represent adult concerns, Mr. Krabs worries about money, Sandy focuses on science. Squidward obsesses over art. Patrick embodies pure, simple joy. He finds happiness in sleeping, eating, and basic games. This influence prevents SpongeBob from getting too caught up in grown-up worries and responsibilities. The Tea at the Tree Dome episode shows why this friendship matters so much. Patrick's advice nearly kills SpongeBob, but it creates one of the most memorable character moments in the series. SpongeBob's willingness to suffer for his friend's guidance shows incredible loyalty and trust. Without Patrick, the Sandy meeting would be safer and more sensible, but it wouldn't reveal anything meaningful about SpongeBob's character. Other relationships would develop differently too. SpongeBob might get closer to Gary, his pet snail, or form stronger bonds with characters like Mr. Krabs, but none of these relationships offer the same unconditional quality. Sandy values intelligence and fitness, Mr. Krabs cares about work ethic and money, Squidward appreciates sophistication. Only Patrick accepts SpongeBob exactly as he is, with zero expectations for improvement. The long-term character growth changes dramatically. Throughout the series, SpongeBob learns about loyalty, forgiveness, and friendship through his adventures with Patrick. They fight and make up constantly, but their bond stays strong. Without these experiences, SpongeBob might struggle with conflict resolution or maintaining long-term relationships. SpongeBob's social skills would evolve completely differently without Patrick. Right now, Patrick acts as this buffer between SpongeBob and the world. When SpongeBob gets nervous or unsure about social situations, Patrick's presence gives him confidence even when Patrick's advice is wrong. Without that safety net, SpongeBob might become more socially aware, but also more anxious about interactions. The ripple effects spread throughout Bikini Bottom too. SpongeBob and Patrick's adventures often involve other residents, creating chaos that brings the community together in weird ways. Without Patrick, these mass disruptions wouldn't happen. Characters like Mrs. Puff might have easier lives, but they'd also miss opportunities for growth that come from dealing with impossible situations. SpongeBob's creative expression changes as well. Many of his most imaginative ideas come from collaborating with Patrick or trying to explain concepts to him. Patrick's confusion forces SpongeBob to think outside the box and approach problems from unexpected angles. Without this creative friction, SpongeBob's solutions become more logical, but less innovative. The emotional core of the show revolves around this friendship teaching viewers about acceptance and loyalty. SpongeBob and Patrick show that true friendship means supporting each other despite obvious flaws. Patrick is lazy, selfish, and often mean-spirited, but SpongeBob loves him anyway. This teaches kids that friendship is about choosing to care for someone regardless of their problems. Patrick also serves as SpongeBob's connection to rebellion and rule breaking. While SpongeBob naturally follows authority and tries to please everyone, Patrick encourages him to bend rules and ignore consequences. This balance prevents SpongeBob from becoming too much of a people pleaser and gives him permission to prioritize his own happiness sometimes. The show's exploration of different personality types gets lost without their dynamic. SpongeBob represents optimistic intelligence, while Patrick embodies carefree ignorance. Together, they show that both approaches to life have value. SpongeBob's knowledge combined with Patrick's simplicity creates solutions that neither could reach alone. Most importantly, Patrick serves as SpongeBob's reality check in the opposite direction. While most characters try pushing SpongeBob toward maturity and responsibility, Patrick pulls him back toward fun and simplicity. This balance keeps SpongeBob grounded in what really matters: friendship, happiness, and finding wonder in everyday moments. The chaos Patrick creates is the main feature. Without Patrick's influence, SpongeBob might be more successful by conventional standards, but he'd lose the spark that makes him special. The disasters and near-death experiences they share together forge a bond that defines both characters and drives the entire emotional core of the show. SpongeBob without Patrick would be like peanut butter without jelly, technically fine on its own, but missing that perfect combination that makes it truly great. Alright, let's jump into another massive what if that would completely transform SpongeBob. What if Mr. Krabs and Plankton never became enemies? This rivalry is basically the backbone of SpongeBob. These two used to be best friends until they became bitter enemies over a burger recipe. Take away that hatred, and you've got a completely different show. No more formula stealing, no more chum bucket, no more epic battles between former friends. The whole mess started when they were kids. Mr. Krabs and Plankton were outcasts who got picked on at school. Plankton for being a nerd and Mr. Krabs for being dirt poor. They decided to start a burger business together to prove they weren't losers. But when their first customer, Old Man Jenkins, passed out after eating their terrible burger, everything went wrong. In Friend or Foe, we see exactly how their friendship died. They started blaming each other for poisoning the poor old guy, things got heated, they fought over the recipe and ended up ripping it in half. When Plankton stormed out, ingredients accidentally fell into the leftover batter, creating the perfect Krabby Patty formula that only Mr. Krabs got to keep. But what if they'd just talked it out instead of letting anger destroy their friendship? What if they'd said sorry and worked together to fix their recipe? Everything would be different. First thing, there'd be no chum bucket. That sad, empty restaurant only exists because Plankton's trying to compete with his former best friend. Without the rivalry, they'd probably run one amazing restaurant together. Mr. Krabs knows business, Plankton knows science. They could have been unstoppable as partners instead of wasting energy fighting each other. Look at Plankton, the whole episode is about him trying to steal the Krabby Patty formula using a mind control device. He crawls into SpongeBob's brain and forces him to bring a burger to his analyzer machine. All that genius level planning just to steal something he helped create in the first place. Without the rivalry, he'd already know the recipe. He could use his big brain for actually improving their food instead of the elaborate theft schemes. SpongeBob's job would be totally different too. Right now, he's constantly protecting Mr. Krabs from Plankton's attacks. He stops theft attempts, gets caught in crossfire, and basically serves as a bodyguard for a burger recipe. Without the conflict, SpongeBob could actually learn from both bosses. Mr. Krabs could teach him business stuff while Plankton shows him cool science tricks for cooking. The whole dynamic in Bikini Bottom would shift. Everyone sees Mr. Krabs as the successful guy and Plankton as the loser who can't get customers. But if they were partners, people might actually respect Plankton for his smarts. His confidence wouldn't be destroyed by constant failure, and he wouldn't need to dream about world domination to feel important. Karen's whole existence would change. She's basically Plankton's computer wife who helps him plot against Mr. Krabs while trying to keep him sane. Without the obsession with stealing formulas, what would they even talk about? Maybe she'd help him with real science projects instead of building death rays and robot suits. Think about all the episodes that just couldn't exist without their rivalry. Plankton introduces the entire conflict: the chum bucket, the lab, the formula stealing. None of that works if they're friends. The Algae's Always Greener has Plankton switching lives with Mr. Krabs because he's jealous. FUN is about SpongeBob trying to teach Plankton about friendship. All of these episodes need the rivalry to make sense. The movies would need complete rewrites. In the first movie, Plankton steals King Neptune's crown and frames Mr. Krabs as part of his plan to take over the world. His whole motivation comes from years of being a failure and resenting his former friend. Without that bitterness, why would he want revenge on anyone? Plankton's character development would follow a completely different path. Right now, he's this tiny guy with a massive ego who constantly fails but never gives up. His determination comes from wanting to prove he's better than Mr. Krabs. Without that drive, would he even be the same character? He might become lazy or content, losing that spark that makes him interesting. The scientific aspect would change dramatically too. Plankton's inventions are all designed for stealing or spying or taking over the world. His lab is basically a villain's lair filled with death rays and robot armies. If he were partners with Mr. Krabs, that same lab might focus on food science, creating new cooking methods or improving ingredients. He could be the world's greatest food scientist instead of its most incompetent villain. Mr. Krabs would change too. His paranoia about protecting the formula, his competitiveness, and his joy in beating Plankton all come from their rivalry. Without it, he'd probably be more relaxed and focused on just running a good restaurant. He wouldn't spend half his time looking over his shoulder for tiny green enemies. His obsession with money might even be less intense, since he wouldn't need to constantly invest in security measures. The comedy would be totally different. So much humor comes from Plankton's schemes failing in ridiculous ways. He gets stepped on because he's tiny, his overconfident plans backfire, and his dramatic villain speeches fall flat. Without the rivalry pushing him to these extremes, he'd be way more stable, but way less funny. The physical comedy of him being small and powerless only works because he's trying to do big, powerful things. Even other characters would be affected. Mrs. Puff deals with SpongeBob's crazy driving, but some of that chaos comes from him getting distracted by work drama. Squidward's misery partly comes from getting caught in the middle of Mr. Krabs and Plankton's battles. Patrick sometimes helps stop Plankton's plans. Without the rivalry, these characters would have completely different relationships with SpongeBob. The show's lessons would disappear too. Their rivalry teaches kids about how small fights can destroy friendships if you let pride take over. It shows that sometimes you need to apologize and work things out instead of holding grudges forever. Without that conflict, the show loses a lot of its deeper meaning about relationships and forgiveness. The business side would be interesting though. Instead of one successful restaurant and one failure, they might have built a food empire. Their combined talents could have led to multiple locations and crazy innovations. Mr. Krabs' money, sense, plus Plankton's scientific knowledge could revolutionize fast food. The competition that makes them both try harder wouldn't exist, but their teamwork might produce even better results. You'd lose all the dramatic tension too. So many episodes build up to Plankton almost getting the formula, only to fail at the last second. That excitement comes from wondering if he'll finally succeed. Will this be the episode where he wins? Without the rivalry, there's no stakes, no tension, just a happy Sponge working at a restaurant where everyone gets along. The chum bucket itself represents failure and jealousy. It's this sad, empty place across from the successful Krusty Krab. It shows what happens when you let bitterness consume you instead of learning from mistakes. The contrast between the two restaurants tells a story about success and failure, friendship and rivalry. Without the competition, that powerful visual metaphor just wouldn't exist. Think about how different the opening credits might be. The Krusty Krab is shown as this important place, but part of its identity comes from being under constant attack. Without Plankton's schemes, it's just a normal burger joint. Instead of a fortress protecting a secret recipe, the whole mystique around the formula only exists because someone's trying to steal it. The educational value would shift completely. Kids learn about persistence from watching Plankton never give up, even when he fails constantly. They learn about loyalty from SpongeBob protecting his boss. They learn about the consequences of letting anger destroy relationships. All of these lessons disappear if everyone just gets along from the start. The show would probably be more peaceful, but way less exciting. You'd have a simple story about a happy fry cook working for two bosses who get along great. It might be nice, but it would lose the epic scope that makes SpongeBob feel bigger than just a cartoon about sea creatures. The rivalry gives the show its sense of adventure and danger. Their relationship also represents how business can become personal in bad ways. They show what happens when competition turns destructive instead of productive. Mr. Krabs and Plankton prove that sometimes winning becomes more important than doing good work or maintaining relationships. This lesson about healthy competition versus toxic rivalry would be completely lost. SpongeBob without the Krabs-Plankton rivalry would be like Batman without the Joker technically possible, but missing the essential conflict that drives the best stories. Their relationship proves that sometimes the most important relationships in our lives are the complicated ones that challenge us, even when they hurt. Moving to the next major what if Squidward never moved back after Squidville? In the actual episode, Squidward gets fed up with SpongeBob and Patrick destroying his house with reef blowers and moves to Tentacle Acres, a gated community designed specifically for octopi like him. At first he's thrilled, everyone rides bikes together, shops for canned bread, does interpretive dance, and plays clarinet in perfect harmony. But after going through the exact same routine day after day, Squidward gets bored out of his mind. He realizes that his perfect life is actually a monotonous loop where nobody stands out and everything is predictable. When he finds an abandoned reef blower and starts causing chaos just like SpongeBob and Patrick used to do, the other residents get angry and chase him with a list of complaints. Eventually, Squidward uses the reef blower to launch himself out of Tentacle Acres, yelling, "Freedom!" as he escapes back to his old life. But what if he never had that moment of clarity? What if Squidward just accepted the boring routine and stayed in his clarinet paradise forever? This would completely destroy the show's core dynamic and leave SpongeBob devastated. SpongeBob's whole world revolves around Squidward being his grumpy neighbor. He annoys Squidward because he genuinely wants to be friends with him, not because he's trying to be mean. SpongeBob sees Squidward as this sophisticated, cultured guy who just needs the right approach to appreciate friendship. Without Squidward next door, SpongeBob would lose his main project of trying to win over his reluctant neighbor. The episode shows SpongeBob and Patrick trying to find Squidward in Tentacle Acres, bringing an apology cake and desperately searching through crowds of identical octopi. SpongeBob keeps mistaking random residents for Squidward. If Squidward never returned, SpongeBob would probably keep visiting Tentacle Acres regularly, hoping to convince him to come home. SpongeBob's optimistic nature would take a serious hit. He's used to Squidward being annoyed with him, but at least Squidward is there to be annoyed. Losing his neighbor entirely would make SpongeBob question whether he's actually a good friend or just a pest that people want to escape from. His confidence would crumble, and he might become more withdrawn and less enthusiastic about everything. The work dynamic at the Krusty Krab would change completely too. Squidward's misery at work partly comes from having to deal with SpongeBob both at home and at the restaurant. If he's living in Tentacle Acres, he might actually quit the Krusty Krab to find a job closer to his new home, or at least be less grumpy because he has an escape from SpongeBob after work. Mr. Krabs would probably hate this arrangement. Squidward might be lazy and unmotivated, but he's also cheap labor who shows up every day. Finding a replacement cashier would cost money, and Mr. Krabs might even blame SpongeBob for driving away a perfectly good employee. This could create tension between SpongeBob and his boss that never existed before. Patrick would be affected too, but in different ways. He and Squidward aren't friends, but Squidward serves as a common target for Patrick and SpongeBob's chaos. Without Squidward to annoy, Patrick might get bored and start causing more random trouble around Bikini Bottom, or he might just focus all his attention on SpongeBob, which could actually strain their friendship. The housing situation would be interesting. Squidward's house would either stay empty or get a new resident. If someone else moves in next to SpongeBob, they might be even worse than Squidward, someone who's genuinely mean instead of just grumpy, or someone so boring that SpongeBob misses Squidward's dramatic reactions even more. Squidward's life in Tentacle Acres would become increasingly hollow. The episode shows him getting more and more depressed as he goes through the same routine every day. Without the chaos of SpongeBob and Patrick to break up the monotony, he'd probably sink into a deep depression. He might not even realize how miserable he is because everyone around him acts exactly the same way. The clarinet trio that Squidward joins represents everything he thinks he wants cultured people who appreciate his musical talents, but playing the same songs with the same people in the same gazebo every night would eventually lose its appeal. Squidward's art comes from his frustration and passion, not from perfect technique and coordination. Sandy would probably try to help SpongeBob get over losing Squidward, but her scientific approach might miss the emotional complexity of the situation. She might suggest logical solutions like making new friends or finding new hobbies, not understanding that SpongeBob specifically misses the challenge of trying to win over someone who doesn't want to be won over. The show's comedy would suffer massively. So much humor comes from Squidward's reactions to SpongeBob and Patrick's antics. His dramatic size, sarcastic comments, and over-the-top anger provide the perfect foil to SpongeBob's enthusiasm. Without that dynamic, episodes would need completely different joke structures. Mrs. Puff might actually benefit from this scenario. With Squidward gone, SpongeBob might throw himself even more into driving lessons as a way to cope with his loneliness. But this could also make him more reckless and emotional behind the wheel, creating new dangers for Mrs. Puff to deal with. The episode structure would have to change dramatically. Many episodes revolve around SpongeBob bothering Squidward at home, Squidward getting revenge, or the three neighbors dealing with some shared problem. Without Squidward, writers would need to create entirely new types of storylines. Squidward's character development would stagnate too. Living in tentacle acres means never being challenged or forced to grow. Squidward complains about SpongeBob and Patrick, but dealing with their chaos actually forces him to be more creative, more resilient, and occasionally more compassionate than he'd be in his comfort zone. The show's message about accepting differences would be lost. Squidward, SpongeBob, and Patrick represent three completely different personality types who somehow make each other's lives more interesting despite their conflicts. If Squidward just gives up and moves away, it suggests that some differences are too big to bridge, which goes against the show's usual themes. SpongeBob's work performance might actually improve in some ways. Without Squidward to bother, he might focus more on cooking and customer service, but his enthusiasm for the job partly comes from having someone to share his excitement with, even if that someone doesn't want to hear it. The Tentacle Acres residents would probably get tired of Squidward eventually. The episode shows them getting angry when he starts acting like SpongeBob and Patrick, but even if he behaved perfectly, his presence would disrupt their routine. They're used to everyone being exactly the same, and Squidward's outsider perspective would gradually become apparent. Squidward would slowly realize that complaining about SpongeBob and Patrick gave his life meaning and purpose. Having something to be grumpy about is better than having nothing to feel passionate about at all. The frustration and chaos they brought to his life were actually signs that he was living fully rather than just going through motions. The relationship between the three neighbors works because they need each other, even when they don't want to admit it. SpongeBob needs someone to chase after and try to befriend, Patrick needs someone to annoy, and Squidward needs someone to complain about. Remove any part of that triangle, and the whole dynamic collapses. SpongeBob's attempts to visit would become increasingly desperate. He might start showing up at Tentacle Acres every day, trying different approaches to win Squidward back. The security guards would probably have to ban him eventually, which would break SpongeBob's heart even more. The irony is that Squidward would probably become everything he hated about his old life. In Tentacle Acres, he's just another face in the crowd, no different from anyone else. At least when he lived next to SpongeBob, he was special. He was the sophisticated neighbor, the artist, the voice of reason in a chaotic situation. Eventually, Squidward would probably realize that his old life wasn't actually that bad. Having neighbors who cared enough to annoy him was better than having neighbors who didn't care about him at all. But by then, it might be too late to rebuild those relationships, leaving everyone worse off than they started. The saddest part is that both SpongeBob and Squidward would be missing what they actually needed. SpongeBob would lose his purpose of trying to befriend the unbefriendable, and Squidward would lose the chaos that actually made his life interesting. They're better together than apart, even if they don't realize it. If you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Let's explore another terrifying possibility. What if Doodlebob had successfully replaced SpongeBob? In Frankendoodle, SpongeBob and Patrick find a magic pencil that brings drawings to life. SpongeBob creates Doodlebob as a prank to fool Squidward, but the drawing becomes violent and steals the magic pencil. Doodlebob beats up Squidward, creates chaos around town, and eventually breaks into SpongeBob's house at night. He tries to erase SpongeBob with the pencil, declaring, "You doodle, me SpongeBob," before getting trapped in a piece of paper. But what if Doodlebob had actually succeeded in erasing the real SpongeBob and taking over his life completely? This would create one of the darkest scenarios in SpongeBob history, with nobody realizing that their beloved friend had been replaced by a violent imposter. Doodlebob's first advantage would be that he looks almost exactly like SpongeBob. The only real differences are his sketchy, hand-drawn appearance and his angry eyebrows. But if he could somehow make himself look more polished, or if people just didn't notice the subtle differences, he could fool everyone for a while. The immediate problem would be Doodlebob's personality. The real SpongeBob is kind, enthusiastic, and innocent. Doodlebob is aggressive, violent, and speaks mostly in gibberish. When he does speak English, it's usually threats or angry declarations. His first interactions with SpongeBob's friends and co-workers would be drastically different from what they expect. Patrick would probably be the first to notice something was wrong, but also the last to understand what it meant. Patrick might think SpongeBob was just having a bad day or trying out a new personality. When Doodlebob started getting violent or speaking in nonsense, Patrick might just laugh it off as another one of SpongeBob's weird phases. Mr. Krabs would definitely notice the change at work. SpongeBob's passion for making Krabby Patties comes from genuine love for cooking and pleasing customers. Doodlebob would probably just slap ingredients together without care, creating terrible food that would drive drive customers away. Mr. Krabs would be furious about the lost profits and demand to know what happened to SpongeBob's work ethic. The most interesting reaction would come from Squidward. He's already been beaten up by Doodlebob once, so he might actually be the first to realize something was seriously wrong. But Squidward also secretly cares about SpongeBob, despite finding him annoying. Seeing his neighbor become genuinely violent and mean would probably disturb Squidward more than he'd want to admit. Gary would definitely know something was wrong. Pets can sense when their owners have been replaced, and Gary's connection to SpongeBob is too strong to be fooled by a drawing. Gary would probably try to alert others, but since he can only meow, nobody would understand his warnings. Sandy would approach the problem scientifically. She'd notice the behavioral changes and start investigating. Sandy's smart enough to figure out that something supernatural happened, especially if she remembered the magic pencil incident. She might even be the one to eventually expose Doodlebob and find a way to rescue the real SpongeBob. The violence would escalate gradually. Doodlebob's first instinct is to attack, as shown when he immediately beats up Squidward. At work, he might start hitting customers who complain about bad food. At home, he might destroy property or hurt Gary. People would be shocked to see SpongeBob acting this way, but they might try to rationalize it as stress or mental health issues. Mrs. Puff would have a nightmare scenario on her hands. SpongeBob is already a dangerous driver when he's trying his best and genuinely cares about safety. Doodlebob behind the wheel would be absolutely catastrophic. He'd probably crash into everything deliberately, turning driving lessons into demolition derby sessions. The language barrier would become obvious pretty quickly. Doodlebob mostly speaks in gibberish like "mi hoi minoi," "awa and fruchen steen," and "ni hoi minoi." When people tried to have normal conversations with him, he'd either respond with nonsense or get frustrated and violent. Friends and co-workers would think SpongeBob had some kind of brain injury or mental breakdown. Doodlebob's lack of understanding about basic social concepts would create chaos. He doesn't understand friendship, work relationships, or community responsibility. He'd probably quit his job randomly, ignore Patrick completely, and start fights with neighbors. The tight-knit community of Bikini Bottom would be completely disrupted by this aggressive imposter. The art style difference might eventually give him away. Doodlebob looks like a child's drawing compared to the polished animation of other characters. If anyone paid close attention to his appearance, they might notice he looks sketchy and incomplete compared to the real SpongeBob. The real SpongeBob, presumably trapped in the paper dimension, would be desperately trying to escape and warn everyone, but being stuck in a two-dimensional world would limit his options. He might be able to communicate through drawings or somehow manipulate paper in the real world, but getting people to notice and understand would be nearly impossible. Doodlebob's emotional range is much more limited than SpongeBob's. The real SpongeBob experiences joy, sadness, fear, excitement, and love in very expressive ways. Doodlebob basically only has anger and aggression. People would notice that SpongeBob stopped being happy, stopped laughing, and stopped showing affection to his friends. The Krusty Krab would probably shut down within days. Doodlebob has no concept of customer service, food safety, or business operations. He'd probably throw food at customers, refuse to take orders, and maybe even attack people who complained. Mr. Krabs would fire him immediately, which would confuse everyone since SpongeBob's job was his life's passion. Patrick's friendship with Doodlebob would become toxic quickly. Patrick relies on SpongeBob's loyalty and kindness to balance out his own selfishness and stupidity. Doodlebob would probably hurt Patrick physically and emotionally, destroying their friendship and leaving Patrick confused and heartbroken. The truth would eventually come out, but it might take weeks or months. Someone would have to remember the magic pencil incident and connect it to SpongeBob's sudden personality change. Sandy would probably be the detective who figured it out. But she'd need help from Patrick and maybe Squidward to actually rescue the real SpongeBob. Doodlebob's plan would ultimately fail because he doesn't understand what makes SpongeBob special. SpongeBob's value comes from his relationships, his kindness, his work ethic, and his genuine care for others. Doodlebob only knows how to be violent and selfish, so he'd quickly alienate everyone who cared about SpongeBob. The psychological impact on SpongeBob's friends would be severe. They'd essentially be mourning the loss of their friend, while his body was still walking around being horrible to them. The betrayal and confusion would damage their trust and happiness, even after the real SpongeBob was rescued. The rescue mission would probably involve using the magic pencil to either destroy Doodlebob or swap their positions. But first, someone would have to realize that the paper with Doodlebob's drawing was actually a portal or prison. SpongeBob might be able to send signals from inside the paper to help them figure it out. The aftermath would be complicated too. Even after getting the real SpongeBob back, his friends would probably be traumatized by the experience. They'd have memories of SpongeBob being violent and mean to them, which would be hard to separate from their feelings about the real person. The episode's happy ending, where Doodlebob is peacefully contained in a book, shows that even violent drawings can be managed safely. But if Doodlebob had succeeded in his replacement plan, it would have demonstrated how easily evil can infiltrate and destroy good communities when people aren't paying attention to the signs. This scenario would essentially be a body snatcher horror story set in the usually cheerful world of SpongeBob. It would show how much the community depends on SpongeBob's genuine goodness, and how quickly everything would fall apart if that goodness was replaced by malice and violence. Time to tackle another mind-blowing scenario. What if Plankton was the same size as everyone else? Plankton's tiny size is basically his entire character. He's this microscopic villain with massive ambitions, constantly getting stepped on, ignored, or flicked away like a booger. His small stature creates most of the comedy in his episodes. He hides in ketchup bottles, gets stuck to people's shoes, and needs tiny machines to do basic tasks that normal-sized characters handle easily. The Algae's Always Greener shows exactly how Plankton's size affects his schemes. He launches himself from a ketchup bottle to steal a Krabby Patty, but gets accidentally shot across the room when an old man uses the condiment. The whole plan fails because he's too small to control the situation. When he switches lives with Mr. Krabs using his invention, he suddenly has all the power and size advantages that come with being the restaurant owner. In the alternate universe, Plankton, now called Mr. Plankton, runs the Krusty Krab, while Mr. Krabs becomes the tiny naked villain trying to steal the formula. The size difference is crucial. Mr. Krabs can't hide in bottles or sneak around unnoticed because he's crab-sized. SpongeBob has to use a clothes cannon to stop him, treating him like a serious threat instead of a minor annoyance. But what if Plankton had always been normal-sized? This would completely flip the show's power dynamic and make him a genuinely scary villain instead of a comedic nuisance. A full-size Plankton would be able to walk right into the Krusty Krab and demand the formula face-to-face. No more hiding in condiment bottles or sneaking through air vents. He could physically overpower SpongeBob and Squidward, making his theft attempts much more direct and threatening. Mr. Krabs would actually need to hire security or call the police instead of just flicking him away. The physical comedy would disappear entirely. So much of Plankton's humor comes from the contrast between his tiny body and huge ego. He gets stepped on, eaten by mistake, stuck to things, and generally treated like an insect. If he was normal size, none of these sight gags would work. The show would lose a major source of laughs. His relationship with Karen would change dramatically too. Right now, Karen is this huge computer that towers over Plankton, making him look even smaller by comparison. She can pick him up, move him around, and physically dominate their relationship. If Plankton was regular sized, they'd be more like equals, which would change their entire dynamic from David and Goliath to a normal married couple. The schemes would be totally different. Plankton's current plans rely on being small enough to sneak around undetected. He hides in SpongeBob's brain, travels through pipes, and builds tiny robots because that's what his size allows. A normal-sized Plankton would probably just rob the place with brute force or hire minions to do his dirty work. Mr. Krabs' attitude toward Plankton would shift completely. Right now, Mr. Krabs sees Plankton as this pathetic little pest who's more annoying than dangerous. He laughs at Plankton's attempts and treats him like a joke, but if Plankton was the same size as him, Mr. Krabs would have to take him seriously as a legitimate business rival and physical threat. SpongeBob's interactions with Plankton would be way more tense. Currently, SpongeBob can accidentally step on Plankton or pick him up like a toy. There's this innocent quality to their conflicts because SpongeBob doesn't see Plankton as genuinely scary. A full-size Plankton would be legitimately intimidating, especially to someone as naive as SpongeBob. The Chum Bucket would probably be more successful too. Part of why nobody goes there is because it's run by this tiny guy who seems incompetent and pathetic. Customers probably don't trust a restaurant owned by someone they could accidentally inhale. A normal-sized Plankton would command more respect and might actually attract business. Plankton's backstory with Mr. Krabs would need to change. Their childhood friendship worked partly because they were both outcasts. Plankton for being tiny and smart, Mr. Krabs for being poor. If Plankton was normal-sized, he'd lose that underdog status and might not have bonded with Mr. Krabs in the same way. The show's themes about size not mattering would disappear. Plankton represents the idea that you don't need to be big to have big dreams or cause big problems. His tiny size makes his ambitions seem both admirable and ridiculous. Take away that contrast, and you lose an important message about not judging people by their physical appearance. Episodes like Plankton's Army wouldn't work at all. That episode is about Plankton recruiting his tiny cousins to help steal the formula. The whole joke is that they're all microscopic and still can't succeed. If they were all normal-sized, it would just be a regular heist instead of a comedy about incompetent tiny criminals. The animation style would change too. Plankton's expressions are exaggerated because animators need to make his emotions visible despite his small size. His eye takes up most of his body, and his movements are quick and jerky. A normal-sized Plankton would have more realistic proportions and movements, making him less visually interesting. Plankton's voice would probably be different as well. Doug Lawrence gives him this high-pitched, squeaky voice that matches his tiny size. A bigger Plankton might have a deeper, more intimidating voice, which would change his entire personality and make him less endearing to audiences. The scientific aspect would shift too. Plankton's inventions are usually miniaturized versions of normal technology, which creates comedy when they malfunction or get destroyed easily. A regular-sized Plankton would build normal-sized machines that would be much more effective and dangerous. His relationship with other characters would be more confrontational. Right now, most characters either ignore Plankton or treat him like a mild annoyance. Squidward barely acknowledges him, Sandy doesn't see him as a real threat, and Patrick often forgets he exists. If Plankton was their size, they'd all have to deal with him as a serious antagonist. The power balance in Bikini Bottom would completely change. Plankton currently represents the little guy fighting against corporate power, even though he's technically a villain. His size makes him sympathetic despite his evil plans. A normal-sized Plankton would just be another greedy businessman, losing that underdog appeal. The show's target audience might shift too. Little kids relate to Plankton partly because he's small like they are. They understand feeling overlooked or powerless because of size. A bigger Plankton wouldn't connect with young viewers in the same way. The merchandise would be different as well. Plankton toys are cute and harmless because he's tiny. A normal-sized Plankton would look more threatening and might not appeal to kids who want cuddly characters. Most importantly, the show would lose its exploration of how size affects power and perception. Plankton's tiny stature forces him to be creative, sneaky, and persistent. These qualities make him both more interesting and more relatable than a typical villain. He has to use his brain instead of his brawn, which creates better stories and more complex schemes. The environmental storytelling would change too. The Chum Bucket is designed for someone Plankton's size with tiny furniture and equipment. If he was normal sized, the restaurant would need to be completely redesigned, losing its unique visual identity. Plankton's dreams of world domination would be more realistic and therefore less funny. His current plans are so ridiculously ambitious for someone his size that they become comedy gold. A normal-sized Plankton with the same goals would just be a regular megalomaniac instead of a lovably delusional tiny tyrant. The irony is that Plankton's size is both his greatest weakness and his greatest strength. It makes him easy to defeat, but also easy to underestimate. Take away that size difference, and you lose the core of what makes him such a compelling and entertaining character. Now let's tackle one of the most game-changing scenarios. What if Mrs. Puff was actually a good driving instructor? Mrs. Puff's entire character is built around being unable to teach SpongeBob how to drive. She's this anxious, constantly inflating pufferfish who gets traumatized every time SpongeBob gets behind the wheel. Her teaching methods are terrible, she panics immediately, and she's given up on actually helping him learn. This creates one of the show's biggest running gags and drives countless episodes. Doing Time shows exactly how Mrs. Puff's incompetence affects both their lives. SpongeBob takes another driving test and completely destroys the boating school, the city, and eventually crashes into a fruit punch truck at a retirement home. Mrs. Puff gets arrested for gross negligence and thrown in prison, where she discovers she actually enjoys being away from SpongeBob. The episode reveals that SpongeBob was her very first student, and his disasters have been traumatizing her from day one. The episode becomes this nightmare loop where Mrs. Puff keeps reliving the crash, sometimes dreaming she's in prison, sometimes seeing other prisoners driving the boat. It shows how deeply SpongeBob's terrible driving has messed with her mental state. She's so damaged by their lessons that she can't even tell reality from hallucinations anymore. But what if Mrs. Puff had been a competent instructor from the beginning? What if she'd actually known how to teach nervous or difficult students? This would eliminate one of the show's most important dynamics and change both characters completely. A good Mrs. Puff would have recognized that SpongeBob's problem is anxiety and overexcitement. She'd use proper teaching techniques like starting with parking lot practice, breaking down complex maneuvers into simple steps, and keeping SpongeBob calm instead of screaming at him. She'd address his tendency to panic and overthink by teaching breathing exercises and confidence-building techniques. SpongeBob would probably have his license within a few episodes. He's clearly intelligent and dedicated, just easily overwhelmed. A skilled instructor would channel his enthusiasm productively instead of letting it spiral into chaos. She'd give him specific, clear instructions instead of just screaming, "Stop!" when things go wrong. The ripple effects would be massive. SpongeBob having a driver's license would open up completely new storylines. He could drive to work instead of walking, take road trips with Patrick, visit Sandy's tree dome by car, or even deliver Krabby Patties around town. His world would expand beyond the small area around his house. Mrs. Puff's character would be totally different too. Right now, she's defined by stress, anxiety, and barely contained rage. A competent Mrs. Puff would be calm, professional, and satisfied with her career. She might even like teaching and take pride in helping students succeed. Her signature puffing up would happen rarely, if ever. The boating school episodes would need completely new premises. Instead of disaster-based comedy, they'd focus on normal driving challenges like parallel parking, highway merging, or dealing with road rage. These might be educational, but would lack the chaotic energy that makes the current episodes so memorable. Mrs. Puff's relationship with other characters would change. Right now, she's this tragic figure that other residents feel sorry for. Everyone in Bikini Bottom knows about her struggles with SpongeBob and sympathizes with her situation. If she was successful, she'd just be another background character without that emotional connection. The show would lose a major source of physical comedy. Mrs. Puff inflating, getting launched through the air, crashing through buildings, and generally suffering slapstick violence provides tons of laughs. A competent instructor wouldn't end up in these situations, eliminating that entire comedy genre from the show. SpongeBob's work life might change too. If he could drive, Mr. Krabs might ask him to do deliveries or run errands. This could create new workplace dynamics and storylines, but it would also mean less time for kitchen-based episodes where SpongeBob interacts with customers and co-workers. The episode structure would be completely different. Many Mrs. Puff episodes follow the same pattern. Lesson starts normally, SpongeBob does something wrong, chaos escalates, Mrs. Puff suffers, everything ends in disaster. Without that formula, writers would need entirely new approaches to these characters. Mrs. Puff's backstory would change dramatically. The show implies she's been traumatized by years of teaching disasters, which explains her current mental state. If she was competent, she might have had a normal, successful career with hundreds of satisfied students. SpongeBob wouldn't be this unique challenge that broke her spirit. The show's exploration of teacher-student relationships would be lost. Mrs. Puff and SpongeBob represent the clash between someone trying to do their job and someone whose enthusiasm creates problems. It's a relatable dynamic that many viewers recognize from their own school experiences. A functional version would be less interesting. SpongeBob's character development would be affected too. His driving failures teach him about perseverance, accepting criticism, and dealing with disappointment. If he succeeded easily, he'd miss these important life lessons. His eternal optimism partly comes from bouncing back from driving disasters. The town's safety would improve dramatically. SpongeBob's driving creates public hazards that endanger everyone. If he was properly trained, Bikini Bottom would have fewer random destruction incidents. This might make the town seem more peaceful but less exciting for viewers. Other characters' reactions to SpongeBob would change. Part of what makes him endearing is that despite causing chaos, he never gives up trying to improve. If he succeeded at driving, people might have higher expectations for him in other areas, potentially creating new sources of conflict. Mrs. Puff's home life would be different. She currently goes home exhausted and traumatized after dealing with SpongeBob. A successful teacher might have energy for hobbies, relationships, or other activities. This could add depth to her character, but would also require developing entirely new aspects of her personality. The show's message about persistence would be complicated. Right now, SpongeBob's repeated failures followed by getting back up teaches kids about not giving up. If a good teacher fixed his problems quickly, that lesson about perseverance through adversity would be lost. The medical aspects would disappear too. Mrs. Puff's constant inflating and deflating is both comedy and a stress response. A calm, competent instructor wouldn't have these physical reactions, eliminating a major visual element that makes her memorable. The legal issues would vanish. Mrs. Puff has been arrested multiple times for SpongeBob's driving disasters. If she was competent, these incidents wouldn't happen, removing an entire category of storylines involving police, courts, and legal consequences. The financial aspects would change completely. Right now, Mrs. Puff's boating school probably loses money constantly from property damage and lawsuits. A competent instructor would run a profitable business, which might attract more students, but would eliminate the struggling small business element. The voice acting would be affected too. Mary Jo Catlett gives Mrs. Puff this stressed, panicked voice that perfectly captures her mental state. A calm, professional instructor would need a completely different vocal approach, losing one of the character's most recognizable features. The merchandise would be different as well. Mrs. Puff toys often show her in various states of inflation or distress. A competent version wouldn't have these dramatic expressions, making her less visually interesting for products aimed at kids. The show's exploration of professional burnout would disappear. Mrs. Puff represents teachers who've been worn down by difficult students and bureaucratic pressure. Her struggles resonate with real educators who face similar challenges. A successful version wouldn't connect with these experiences. The timing and pacing of episodes would change too. Much of the comedy comes from the escalating tension as lessons go from bad to worse. Without that build-up, episodes would need different rhythms and probably wouldn't be as funny or exciting. SpongeBob's relationship with other authority figures might be affected. His experiences with Mrs. Puff teach him how to deal with frustrated adults and authority figures who lose their patience. If he only knew competent teachers, he might not develop those social skills. Most importantly, the show would lose one of its most perfect examples of how good intentions can create problems. Mrs. Puff means well but is terrible at her job. SpongeBob wants to learn but creates chaos. Their dynamic shows how people can hurt each other despite caring about each other. The relationship between dreams and reality would change too. SpongeBob dreams of being a great driver while Mrs. Puff dreams of never seeing him again. If she was competent, both could achieve their goals quickly, eliminating the tension between what they want and what they can actually achieve. A competent Mrs. Puff would fundamentally change SpongeBob from a show about lovable failures into a show about competent people doing normal things. Sometimes the best characters are the ones who are bad at their jobs, because their struggles make them human and relatable. Before we move on to the next What If, make sure you're subscribed. Here's another fascinating scenario to consider. What if Pearl was Mr. Krabs' biological daughter instead of adopted? The whole dynamic between Mr. Krabs and Pearl is built on this weird biological mystery. He's a tiny red crab, she's a massive sperm whale, and the show never explains how this family situation came to be. This creates tons of visual comedy and raises questions that keep fans theorizing. Their size difference alone makes for hilarious situations where Pearl accidentally crushes things or Mr. Krabs gets lost in her room. Bossy Boots shows exactly how their species difference affects their relationship. Pearl comes to work at the Krusty Krab during summer vacation and wants to transform it into the Cuddly Crab, a hip teenage cafe. She removes the grill, changes the menu to just salads and tea, and decorates everything with hearts and rainbows. Mr. Krabs goes along with it because he loves his daughter, but the changes are losing money and driving away customers. The episode highlights their different perspectives. Pearl wants trendy, modern things, while Mr. Krabs cares about tradition and profit. She's embarrassed by the crusty name of the restaurant and wants something more appealing to her teenage friends. Mr. Krabs ultimately has to fire her through SpongeBob because her changes are ruining the business, but he can't bring himself to do it directly because he loves her so much. But what if Pearl was actually a crab like her father? This would completely change their relationship dynamic and eliminate one of the show's most interesting mysteries. A crab Pearl would probably be much smaller, maybe Mr. Krabs' size or slightly bigger as a teenager. This would eliminate all the physical comedy that comes from their size difference. No more jokes about Pearl accidentally breaking things, or Mr. Krabs getting dwarfed by his daughter. Their hugs wouldn't be these hilarious mismatched embraces where he disappears into her flipper. More importantly, a biological crab daughter would likely share Mr. Krabs' obsession with money. Instead of being embarrassed by his cheapness, she'd probably encourage it and help him find new ways to save or make money. She might even be more ruthless than him when it comes to business, creating a terrifying father-daughter money-making team. The Bossy Boots episode would be completely different. Instead of wanting to turn the Krusty Krab into a trendy cafe, a crab Pearl might want to make it more profitable. She'd probably suggest raising prices, cutting portions, or finding cheaper ingredients. Her ideas would align with Mr. Krabs' values instead of clashing with them. The teenage rebellion aspect would be lost entirely. Right now, Pearl represents normal teenage behavior wanting to fit in, being embarrassed by her dad, caring about appearances and trends. A crab Pearl raised by Mr. Krabs would probably share his values from a young age, making her less relatable to actual teenagers watching the show. The adoption storyline creates depth and mystery that would disappear. Fans love theorizing about how Mr. Krabs ended up with a whale daughter. Some think he found her as an orphaned baby, others believe she's adopted from a failed relationship, and some create elaborate backstories about whale-crab relationships. Remove the adoption element, and you lose all that fan engagement and speculation. The show's themes about family acceptance would change too. Mr. Krabs and Pearl show that family is about love and being there for each other, not just about being related by blood or looking alike. Their bond proves that what matters most in a family is how much you care. If Pearl were his real daughter, the message wouldn't be as strong. Pearl's character development would be fundamentally different. Right now, she's torn between loving her father and being embarrassed by him. She wants to please him, but also fit in with her peers, a crab. Pearl wouldn't have this internal conflict because she'd naturally fit into both her family and crab society. The economic dynamics would shift dramatically. Pearl currently costs Mr. Krabs a fortune, she's expensive to feed, wants trendy clothes and gadgets, and needs a massive bedroom. A smaller crab daughter would cost much less to maintain, which might make Mr. Krabs even greedier since he'd have more disposable income. The social aspects would be completely different too. Pearl goes to whale school, has whale friends, and participates in whale culture. A crab Pearl would probably go to the same school as other young crabs in Bikini Bottom, creating different social dynamics and storylines. The show's commentary on teenage culture would suffer. Pearl represents typical teenage interests that clash with adult practical concerns. Her whale friends care about boys, fashion, and social status, while Mr. Krabs worries about money and business. A crab daughter raised with his values wouldn't provide this generational contrast. The visual design would lose its impact. The sight of a tiny crab trying to parent a massive whale is inherently funny and memorable. A normal-sized crab family would be much less visually interesting and wouldn't create the same comedic opportunities. The show's exploration of different species living together would be reduced. Bikini Bottom is full of interspecies relationships and families, and Mr. Krabs and Pearl are one of the best examples. Their relationship shows that different types of sea creatures can form loving families despite their differences. Episodes about Pearl's teenage problems would need complete rewrites. Her current issues feeling different from her dad, being embarrassed by his cheapness, wanting expensive things come from their species difference and opposing values. A crab Pearl with inherited money obsession wouldn't have these relatable teenage struggles. The voice acting would probably change too. Lori Allen gives Pearl this Valley Girl teenage whale voice that contrasts perfectly with Clancy Brown's gruff Mr. Krabs. A crab Pearl might sound more like her father, losing that vocal contrast that makes their scenes so entertaining. The show's merchandising would be affected as well. Pearl's distinctive whale design makes her instantly recognizable and appealing to fans. A smaller crab version would be less visually striking and might not sell as well in toy stores. The restaurant business storylines would be less interesting. Right now, Pearl and Mr. Krabs often disagree about how to run the Krusty Krab because they have different priorities. A money-obsessed crab daughter would always agree with his business decisions, eliminating that source of conflict and character development. The babysitting episodes would disappear entirely. SpongeBob sometimes has to watch Pearl when Mr. Krabs is away, which creates chaos because of her size and teenage attitude. A well-behaved crab daughter wouldn't need supervision and wouldn't create the same comedic situations. The show's message about loving people, despite their differences, would be weakened. Mr. Krabs and Pearl prove that you can love family members even when they're nothing like you. Their relationship teaches kids that differences in appearance, interests, and values don't have to divide families. The educational aspects would change too. Kids watching the show learn about different types of sea life through characters like Pearl. Having a whale daughter teaches viewers about marine biology and ocean diversity. A crab family would be less educational and wouldn't expose kids to different species. The dating and romance storylines would be affected as well. Pearl's crushes and romantic interests are usually other whales or large sea creatures. A crab Pearl would probably date other crabs, creating different romantic dynamics and eliminating the comedy that comes from her massive size affecting her love life. The expense jokes would disappear completely. Much of the humor around Pearl comes from how expensive she is to maintain. Her massive appetite, huge bedroom, and costly teenage wants create financial stress for Mr. Krabs. A smaller crab daughter would be much cheaper, removing this source of comedy and character development. The protection instincts would change dramatically. Mr. Krabs is very protective of Pearl, partly because she's different and stands out. A crab daughter would blend in with Bikini Bottom society, so Mr. Krabs might not feel the same need to shield her from the world. The school dynamics would be completely different. Pearl often feels out of place or different at school, which many kids can relate to. A crab. Pearl attending crab school wouldn't have these identity struggles or feelings of not fitting in. Most importantly, the mystery element would vanish completely. One of the most enduring questions in SpongeBob is how Mr. Krabs ended up with a whale daughter. Fans have been debating this for decades, creating theories, artwork, and discussions. A biological relationship would answer this question immediately and remove that source of fan engagement. The generational gap themes would be lost too. Pearl represents young people who care about trends and social acceptance, while Mr. Krabs represents older generations who prioritize practical concerns like money and tradition. Their conflicts reflect real family dynamics that many viewers recognize from their own lives. The show's celebration of unconventional families would be diminished. In a world where many kids come from blended families, adoptions, or non-traditional households, Pearl and Mr. Krabs represent the idea that families come in all shapes and sizes. Their relationship validates different family structures and shows that love matters more than biology. A biological crab Pearl would fundamentally change SpongeBob from a show about acceptance and diversity into something more conventional. The weird, wonderful family dynamic between a penny-pinching crab and his whale daughter's part of what makes the show special and memorable. Let's dive into another massive game changer. What if Squidward was actually talented at art and music? Squidward's whole thing is being bad at art but thinking he's amazing. He plays clarinet like a dying whale but believes he's the next Mozart. His paintings look like they were made by a kindergartner, but he acts like he's Picasso. This gap between what he thinks and reality is what makes him funny and bitter. Opposite Day shows this perfectly. Squidward wants to sell his house and escape from SpongeBob and Patrick. When the real estate agent comes to look at his place, she sees his art gallery full of terrible self-portraits. SpongeBob, pretending to be Squidward, plays his clarinet for her. She keeps telling him to stop, but he keeps playing because he thinks it sounds good. The joke works because everyone knows his music is awful except him. The episode shows Squidward's house covered in paintings of himself that look ridiculous and amateur. His whole identity is built around being this misunderstood artist, but really he just sucks at everything creative. The real estate agent gets so annoyed by his terrible music and weird art that she refuses to sell his house. But what if Squidward actually had real talent? What if his clarinet playing was beautiful and his paintings were masterpieces? This would completely destroy his character and change the entire show. A genuinely talented Squidward would be successful and probably rich. He'd have art shows, record deals, and concert performances. Instead of working at the Krusty Krab, he'd be living his dream as a full-time artist. This would remove him from the main story entirely, since he wouldn't need his cashier job. His relationship with SpongeBob would be totally different. Right now, Squidward is jealous because SpongeBob is happy and good at his simple job while Squidward fails at his artistic dreams. If Squidward was successful, he wouldn't be bitter and jealous anymore. The whole dynamic between them would disappear. The main source of Squidward's anger comes from feeling like his life is wasted. He thinks he's meant for greatness, but stuck in a boring job with annoying neighbors. A successful artist version would be happy and fulfilled, which would make him way less interesting as a character. SpongeBob's admiration for Squidward would make sense, but wouldn't be funny anymore. Right now, SpongeBob thinks Squidward is talented despite all evidence proving otherwise. This creates comedy because viewers know SpongeBob is wrong. If Squidward was actually good, there'd be no irony or humor in SpongeBob's praise. The show would lose one of its best running jokes. Squidward's terrible clarinet playing makes neighbors complain and audiences run away screaming. If he played beautifully, this entire source of comedy would vanish. No more scenes of people covering their ears or windows breaking from his music. His motivation would change completely. Currently, Squidward dreams of escaping Bikini Bottom to become famous. If he was already talented, he'd either be famous already or well on his way. The desperation that drives his character would be gone. Art contest episodes would be completely different. When Squidward enters competitions, the humor comes from his confidence crashing into his obvious lack of skill. If he was genuinely good, he'd win these contests, eliminating the comedy and changing those storylines entirely. He probably wouldn't even live in the same neighborhood. Successful artists don't usually live in middle-class areas next to fry cooks and unemployed starfish. He'd move somewhere fancy, removing him from the show's main setting. The show's message about trying hard despite failure would be lost. Squidward represents people who keep pursuing their dreams even when they're not good at them. Kids can relate to working hard at something and still struggling. A naturally talented Squidward wouldn't teach these lessons. His relationship with Mr. Krabs would disappear. Squidward only works at the Krusty Krab because he needs money and can't make it as an artist. A successful Squidward wouldn't need that job, so we'd lose their boss-employee conflicts. The show would lose its commentary on working-class dreams. Squidward represents people who have artistic ambitions but get stuck in service jobs to pay bills. His frustration reflects real economic pressures. A wealthy artist wouldn't face these problems. One of Squidward's most human traits is his self-delusion about his abilities. Everyone knows someone who thinks they're better at something than they actually are. This makes Squidward relatable even when he's annoying. Take away that flaw, and he becomes less human. Other characters would treat him completely differently. Right now, most people ignore or mock Squidward's artistic pretensions. If he was genuinely talented, they'd respect and admire him instead. This would change every relationship dynamic. The contrast between SpongeBob and Squidward would be less interesting. SpongeBob finds happiness in simple things, while Squidward is miserable despite having similar circumstances. If Squidward achieved his dreams, this philosophical difference would be less clear. Episodes about Squidward's failures would need to be completely rewritten. Many storylines revolve around his artistic disasters or professional disappointments. Success would eliminate these plot possibilities entirely. The voice acting would probably change. Roger Bumpass gives Squidward this nasally, irritated voice that captures his bitterness perfectly. A happy, successful Squidward would need a completely different vocal approach. Even his appearance would change. Squidward's grumpy expression and slouched posture show his dissatisfaction with life. A fulfilled artist would probably stand taller, smile more, and look more confident. The show's balance would be ruined. SpongeBob represents enthusiasm, Patrick represents ignorance, and Squidward represents cynicism. If Squidward became happy and successful, that cynical perspective would be reduced, making the show less balanced. Kids and adults who relate to feeling unappreciated or misunderstood connect with Squidward's character. A successful version wouldn't appeal to those feelings, changing his fan base completely. The educational value would shift too. Kids learn from Squidward that talent requires practice and not everyone is naturally gifted. His failures teach humility and accepting limitations. A naturally talented Squidward wouldn't provide these lessons. The show makes fun of artistic snobbery through Squidward's character. He acts pompous about culture while having no real talent. This satire works because of the gap between his attitude and ability. If he was actually talented, the joke wouldn't work. Workplace comedy would disappear. Squidward's resentment toward his job comes from feeling overqualified for service work. He thinks he's too good for taking orders and handling money. A successful artist wouldn't have this attitude. Financial stress contributes to Squidward's grumpiness. He's broke and can't afford the lifestyle he wants. A successful artist would have money for nice things, eliminating this source of frustration and character development. The show explores themes about people feeling like they've wasted their potential. Squidward represents adults who didn't achieve their childhood dreams and feel stuck in unfulfilling lives. Success would eliminate this relatable struggle. Comedy timing would be affected. Much of Squidward's humor comes from the gap between expectations and reality. When he expects applause but gets complaints, that disappointment creates laughs. Success would eliminate these comedic moments. Character growth would be different too. Squidward's development comes from learning to appreciate what he has instead of always wanting more. A successful artist wouldn't need this growth, making him a static character. The show would lose important lessons about self-acceptance. Squidward's journey teaches that talent isn't everything, and happiness can come from unexpected places. If he was naturally gifted, he wouldn't learn these valuable lessons. Most importantly, the show would change from being about accepting failure and finding joy in simple things to being about achieving dreams through talent. Sometimes the most interesting characters are the ones who don't get what they want because their struggles make them human. Squidward's lack of talent is essential to who he is and why the show works. His delusions, failures, and bitterness create comedy while teaching important lessons about persistence, humility, and finding happiness despite disappointment. A talented Squidward would be a completely different character in a completely different show. Time to explore another huge possibility. What if SpongeBob had a brother or sister? SpongeBob's whole deal is being an only child who gets all his parents' love and attention. Harold and Margaret Squarepants treat him like their precious baby, even though he's an adult with his own house and job. This creates his innocent, sheltered personality and explains why he's so happy and trusting he's never had to compete for anything or deal with sibling fights. Home Sweet Pineapple shows this family thing perfectly. When SpongeBob's house gets eaten by nematodes, he immediately calls his parents for help. They drive over right away, ready to take him home and let him move back in. Harold says, Your mother has dinner waiting, showing how they still baby him. The whole episode treats SpongeBob like he's their only kid in the world. The episode also shows how much his parents care about his independence. When his house magically grows back, they're happy to see him settled again. There's no mention of other children they need to worry about, or siblings who might be jealous of the attention SpongeBob gets. His parents can focus entirely on him. But what if SpongeBob had a sibling living in Bikini Bottom or back home with his parents? This would completely change his character and create tons of new storylines, but it would also ruin what makes SpongeBob special. A sibling would force SpongeBob to share attention for the first time in his life. Right now, he's used to being everyone's favorite, his parents adore him, Gary depends on him, and even his friends rely on his happiness. Adding a brother or sister would create competition and jealousy that SpongeBob has never dealt with. If the sibling was more successful than SpongeBob, it would probably crush his confidence. SpongeBob's self-esteem comes from believing he's good at things, and that people like him. A brother who was better at cooking, more popular, or more accomplished would make SpongeBob feel bad about himself for the first time. On the other hand, if SpongeBob was the more successful sibling, it would change his humble personality. Right now, SpongeBob doesn't brag or act better than anyone, but if he had a struggling brother or sister, he might develop an ego or feel guilty about his success. The Home Sweet Pineapple episode would be totally different with a sibling involved. Instead of SpongeBob being the only child his parents worry about, they'd have multiple kids to think about. Maybe the sibling would offer to help rebuild the house, or there'd be fights about whether SpongeBob should move back home and take up space. SpongeBob's relationship with Gary would probably be less important. Right now, Gary is like his only family member in Bikini Bottom, which makes their bond special. If SpongeBob had a sibling nearby, Gary might just be a regular pet instead of a family member. The sibling's personality would matter a lot. If they were grumpy like Squidward, SpongeBob would have to deal with family criticism at home. If they were lazy like Patrick, SpongeBob might become the responsible one who has to take care of everyone. A more successful sibling could explain why SpongeBob works at a fast food place instead of having bigger dreams. Maybe his brother or sister got all the encouragement to go to college or start a business, leaving SpongeBob to find his own way. The family stuff in other episodes would get more complicated too. When SpongeBob's parents visit, they'd probably want to spend time with both kids equally. SpongeBob might feel jealous if his sibling got more attention or praise. Holiday episodes would be different as well. Instead of SpongeBob being the center of family celebrations, he'd have to share the spotlight. This could create new fights or force him to think about others more. The sibling could also live far away, which would create different problems. SpongeBob might feel guilty about living so close to his parents while his brother or sister is somewhere else. He might worry about not being there for family emergencies or missing important stuff. If the sibling was older, SpongeBob might feel pressure to live up to their example. If they were younger, he might feel responsible for being a good role model. Either way, it would add stress to his usually easy life. The show's themes about friendship would change too. Right now, SpongeBob treats his friends like family because he doesn't have siblings. Patrick is like a brother, Sandy is like a sister, and even Squidward fills a family role. Adding real siblings would make these friendships less intense and meaningful. SpongeBob's work ethic might be different as well. Some of his dedication comes from wanting to make his parents proud as their only child. With siblings competing for approval, he might be more ambitious and competitive, or he might give up more easily if he felt overshadowed. The living situation would be interesting to explore. Would the sibling live in Bikini Bottom too? Having another family member nearby would change SpongeBob's independence and probably create more family episodes instead of friend episodes. The sibling's job would matter a lot. If they were also in food service, there might be work rivalry. If they had a fancy career, SpongeBob might feel embarrassed about flipping burgers. If they were unemployed, SpongeBob might feel pressure to support them with money. SpongeBob's happiness might be less pure with a sibling around. Right now, his positivity comes from genuine innocence and being sheltered. Sibling rivalry and family competition could make him more sneaky or defensive. The show would probably need to explain why this sibling was never mentioned before. Either they'd be a new character introduced suddenly, which would feel weird, or they'd be revealed to have existed all along, which would contradict years of SpongeBob being treated like an only child. Episodes about SpongeBob's childhood would get more complicated. Right now, flashbacks show him as a happy kid doing his own thing. Adding a sibling would require rewriting his entire backstory and explaining their relationship throughout their lives. The siblings' relationship with SpongeBob's friends would create new dynamics too. They might get along better with Squidward if they were more mature, or they might annoy Patrick if they were too serious. These new relationships could threaten SpongeBob's existing friendships. Family visits would be less special as well. When Harold and Margaret come to see SpongeBob, it's a big deal because he's their only child in Bikini Bottom. If they had another kid to visit regularly, SpongeBob's visits would be more routine and less meaningful. The show's message about found family would be weaker. Part of SpongeBob's appeal is that he creates his own family with friends and pets because his real family lives far away. Adding siblings would make this theme less important. The sibling could also create money problems. Right now, SpongeBob can afford his lifestyle on a fry cook salary because he's just supporting himself and Gary. If he had to help support a sibling or compete with them for parents' financial help, his money situation would be more stressful. Episodes about growing up would be different too. SpongeBob's childlike wonder works because he's been protected from typical adult responsibilities like taking care of family members. A sibling would force him to mature in ways that might ruin his innocent charm. The show would probably focus more on family drama instead of the current mix of work, friendship, and adventure stories. While family episodes can be good, SpongeBob works best when it's about his chosen family of friends rather than biological family complications. Most importantly, SpongeBob's character works because he's innocent and hasn't been shaped by typical family competition. His kindness comes from never having to fight for attention. His generosity comes from always having enough love and support. Adding a sibling would force SpongeBob to deal with jealousy, competition, and family politics for the first time. While this could create interesting storylines, it would fundamentally change what makes him special, his pure, uncomplicated joy that comes from being loved unconditionally as an only child. The show works because SpongeBob represents childhood innocence preserved into adulthood. Sibling rivalry and family competition would corrupt that innocence and make him more like a regular person dealing with regular family problems instead of the unique character fans love. If you're enjoying the content, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Moving on to the next what if. What if SpongeBob was born as a starfish instead of a sponge? SpongeBob's whole thing is being the smart, responsible one compared to Patrick. He's excited and happy, but also gets stuff done. He tries hard at everything and wants to help people. Patrick is the lazy starfish who sleeps under a rock and doesn't understand most things. Their friendship works because they're opposites. Hall Monitor shows this perfectly. SpongeBob gets picked as Hall Monitor at boating school and takes the job way too seriously. He gives such a long speech that the whole school day ends before he's done. Then he decides to be Hall Monitor for the entire city. He tries to direct traffic but causes huge car crashes. He breaks into someone's house pretending to be the open window maniac to teach them about safety. Eventually, the police think he's a dangerous criminal. The episode works because SpongeBob has good intentions but terrible execution. He's smart enough to understand ideas like safety and helping people, but too excited to realize he's making everything worse. Patrick helps him hunt for the maniac without realizing it's SpongeBob himself. The comedy comes from SpongeBob thinking he's helping while Patrick is completely clueless about what's happening. But what if SpongeBob was a starfish too? What if both characters were as dumb and lazy as Patrick? This would create a totally different show with twice the chaos and nobody to fix anything. Two starfish would be a complete disaster. Instead of one character who means well but screws up, you'd have two characters who don't understand anything and make terrible choices together. The Hall Monitor episode would be pure destruction with nobody even trying to help. A starfish SpongeBob would probably live under a rock like Patrick. There'd be no cool pineapple house, no organized life, and no Gary the Snail. Starfish in the show just sleep under rocks all day. They don't have pets, or fancy homes, or any kind of structure. The job at the Krusty Krab would be impossible. SpongeBob's work requires energy, memory, and cooking skills. A starfish version would be too lazy and stupid to do any job. Mr. Krabs would fire him right away, or the restaurant would burn down because nobody was paying attention. The friendship between SpongeBob and Patrick works because they balance each other. SpongeBob brings energy and ideas, while Patrick brings a different perspective through his complete lack of understanding. If both were starfish, they just make each other worse without anyone to provide balance. Episodes would be much shorter because starfish don't do much. Patrick's typical day is sleeping, eating, and maybe walking around confused. Two Patricks would just sleep under rocks and have short conversations about nothing. There wouldn't be enough happening to fill whole episodes. The educational stuff would disappear completely. SpongeBob teaches kids about friendship, working hard, and trying your best even when things go wrong. A starfish SpongeBob wouldn't have those qualities. He'd teach kids that being lazy and ignoring responsibilities is okay. Mrs. Puff's driving school would be even worse than it already is. Regular SpongeBob is dangerous because he tries too hard and gets nervous. A starfish SpongeBob would be dangerous because he wouldn't understand basic things like stopping, turning, or watching where he's going. Mrs. Puff would probably quit after one lesson. Squidward's relationship with them would change too. Squidward gets annoyed because SpongeBob bothers him constantly with enthusiasm and activities. A lazy starfish SpongeBob might not bother Squidward as much, but he also wouldn't create the fun conflicts that make their relationship interesting. Sandy wouldn't be friends with a starfish SpongeBob. Sandy likes SpongeBob because he's curious and willing to try new things. A starfish SpongeBob would be too lazy to visit her underwater dome or help with science experiments. Their friendship exists because SpongeBob is active and interested in learning. The show's message about following dreams would be lost. SpongeBob loves his job and chases his goals with passion. Starfish don't seem to have dreams or goals beyond eating and sleeping. A starfish SpongeBob would represent giving up on life instead of embracing it. Physical comedy would be way more limited. SpongeBob's sponge body lets him change shapes, soak up water, and bounce back from getting hurt. Starfish are just star-shaped and can't do those flexible things. The visual jokes would be much more basic and boring. Episodes about SpongeBob's talents wouldn't work. He's good at cooking, catching jellyfish, and lots of other activities that need practice and coordination. Starfish don't seem able to learn complex skills. They're more about basic instincts and simple reactions. The show would be much slower. SpongeBob's energy drives most episodes forward with his excitement and constant movement. Two lazy starfish would create a boring show with long pauses and barely anything happening. Character growth would be impossible. SpongeBob learns from mistakes and becomes a better person throughout the series. Patrick stays the same because he's too simple to change. Two Patricks would mean no character development for anyone. The other characters would have to do all the work. Mr. Krabs, Sandy, and Squidward would need to provide all the energy and smart thinking since the main characters wouldn't contribute anything useful. This would completely change what the show is about. Emotional scenes would be rare. SpongeBob feels deep emotions that create some of the show's best moments. Starfish seem to only feel basic things like being hungry or sleepy. The emotional range would be very limited. Problem-solving episodes couldn't exist. Many SpongeBob stories involve him trying to fix problems or overcome challenges. Starfish don't seem to think about problems in complex ways. They just accept whatever happens and don't try to change anything. Adults wouldn't enjoy the show as much. Grown-ups like SpongeBob partly because of clever writing and humor that comes from his personality. Two simple starfish wouldn't provide the same level of entertainment for older viewers. Toys and merchandise would be harder to sell. SpongeBob's square shape and expressive face make him easy to recognize. A starfish version would look too much like Patrick and wouldn't be as special or marketable. The voice acting would be totally different. Tom Kenny gives SpongeBob this high-energy, excited voice that matches his personality. A starfish SpongeBob would probably sound like Patrick, slow, confused, and boring. Social commentary would disappear. SpongeBob often represents working people and adult responsibilities. Starfish don't work or participate in society in meaningful ways. The show would lose its ability to talk about real-world issues. The celebration of being different would be weakened. SpongeBob stands out because he's unique compared to everyone around him. If he was just another starfish like Patrick, that special quality would be gone. The show's core message would be lost. SpongeBob represents keeping childlike wonder while still being responsible. He shows that you can be mature and productive while still finding joy in simple things. Starfish represent pure laziness without any of the responsibility. Most importantly, the friendship that makes the show special would be ruined. Instead of two different personalities who challenge each other and bring out interesting qualities, you'd have two identical characters who don't help each other grow or change. The humor would be much more basic too. A lot of SpongeBob's comedy comes from his misunderstanding situations or trying too hard at simple tasks. Starfish humor would just be about being confused and lazy, which gets old fast. Episodes about work, school, or achieving goals wouldn't make sense. These require characters who care about something and want to improve. Starfish don't seem motivated by anything except basic survival needs. A starfish SpongeBob would change the show from a story about an optimistic worker trying his best in an adult world to a story about two lazy creatures who don't understand or care about life. All the heart, humor, and meaning that make SpongeBob special would disappear completely. Moving on to another major possibility, what if Larry the Lobster was out of shape instead of a fitness guru? Larry's whole character is built around being the ultimate beach athlete. He's buff, confident, and represents everything SpongeBob wishes he could be physically. Larry sets the tone for Goo Lagoon as this competitive fitness paradise where everyone tries to impress each other with strength and athletic ability. He's the cool guy that everyone looks up to and wants to hang out with. Ripped Pants shows this dynamic perfectly. Larry comes up to SpongeBob and Sandy at the beach and asks if they want to lift weights. He demonstrates incredible strength by lifting heavy weights and even picking up the entire audience seating area with people still sitting on it. Sandy tries to impress him by lifting anchors while SpongeBob struggles just to pick up a twig with 2 marshmallows on it. The episode works because Larry represents this impossible standard that SpongeBob can never reach. When SpongeBob fails at weightlifting and accidentally rips his pants, everyone laughs. This starts his obsession with getting attention through ripped pants jokes instead of actual physical achievement. Larry's presence creates the competitive atmosphere that drives SpongeBob to desperate measures for approval. But what if Larry was out of shape and uninterested in fitness? What if he was just another regular beachgoer who preferred sitting around instead of working out? This would completely change the culture of Goo Lagoon and eliminate one of SpongeBob's main motivations. An out-of-shape Larry would probably spend his time eating snacks, taking naps, and maybe reading magazines under an umbrella. Instead of inspiring others to exercise, he'd represent the opposite lifestyle. The beach would lose its competitive fitness atmosphere and become more of a relaxation spot. The Ripped Pants episode would need to be completely different. Without Larry's weightlifting demonstration, there'd be no reason for SpongeBob to try lifting weights and feel inadequate. The whole setup that leads to his pants ripping wouldn't exist. Maybe SpongeBob would rip his pants in some other way, but it wouldn't have the same meaning. SpongeBob's insecurity about his physical appearance comes partly from comparing himself to Larry. Without a buff role model to measure himself against, SpongeBob might be more confident about his body. He wouldn't feel the need to prove his strength or impress anyone with athletic ability. The show would lose an important character type, the cool, popular athlete that nerdy characters usually want to befriend. Larry represents the jock archetype that exists in every school and social group. Without him, the show would miss out on exploring those social dynamics. Sandy's character might be affected too. In many episodes, she bonds with Larry over physical activities and sports. An out-of-shape Larry wouldn't share her interests in extreme sports, karate, or scientific adventures that require physical stamina. Their friendship would be much different or might not exist at all. Episodes specifically about fitness and exercise would disappear entirely. Larry often appears in stories about working out, sports competitions, and beach activities. If he was lazy and unfit, these storylines wouldn't make sense. The show would lose a whole category of plots. The social hierarchy at Goo Lagoon would be completely different. Right now, Larry sits at the top as the most respected beachgoer. Other characters look up to him and want his approval. An out-of-shape Larry might be at the bottom of the social ladder, or the beach might not have any hierarchy at all. SpongeBob's motivation in many episodes comes from wanting to be cool like Larry. He tries to work out, play sports, and be more athletic to gain respect. Without that inspiration, SpongeBob might focus on different goals or have less drive to improve himself physically. The show's message about body positivity would change too. Larry's character sometimes teaches lessons about not judging people by their appearance and that physical strength isn't everything. But he also represents the ideal that many characters strive for. An out-of-shape Larry would send a different message about accepting yourself as you are. Beach episodes would have a totally different vibe. Instead of high-energy sports and competitions, Goo Lagoon might be portrayed as a lazy, relaxing place where people just lie around. This could be nice, but it would eliminate a lot of comedic and dramatic possibilities. The show would miss out on physical comedy involving Larry's strength. Many jokes come from him casually doing impossible feats of strength or being so muscular that normal activities become difficult. An out-of-shape Larry wouldn't provide those visual gags. Other characters' fitness journeys would be affected. When SpongeBob, Patrick, or Sandy want to get in shape, they often turn to Larry for advice or inspiration. Without his expertise and example, they'd need to find motivation elsewhere or might not pursue fitness at all. The competitive spirit that drives many beach episodes would disappear. Larry often organizes or participates in contests and challenges. An unfit Larry wouldn't be interested in competition, making Goo Lagoon a much more peaceful but potentially boring place. Episodes about teamwork and training would need different premises. Larry often helps other characters prepare for events or teaches them new skills. If he was out of shape, he wouldn't have the knowledge or ability to coach anyone. The show would lose an important contrast character. Larry's confidence and physical ability highlight SpongeBob's insecurities and limitations. Without that comparison, SpongeBob's struggles wouldn't seem as significant or relatable. Beach fashion and culture would be different too. Larry influences what's considered cool at the beach. His fitness-focused lifestyle promotes athletic wear and healthy activities. An out-of-shape Larry might promote a more casual, comfort-focused beach culture. The voice acting and personality would probably change. Larry's current voice matches his confident, energetic personality. An out-of-shape version would likely sound more tired, less enthusiastic, and maybe more self-deprecating. Episodes about self-improvement would have different angles. Right now, Larry represents the rewards of hard work and dedication. An unfit Larry might represent giving up on goals or accepting mediocrity, which could send negative messages to young viewers. The show would miss opportunities to teach about health and exercise. Larry's lifestyle promotes physical activity and taking care of your body. An out-of-shape Larry might accidentally encourage laziness and poor health habits. Romantic storylines would change too. Larry's attractiveness comes partly from his physical fitness. Female characters are often impressed by his strength and athleticism. An out-of-shape Larry would have different romantic dynamics or might struggle with dating entirely. The social commentary about gym culture and fitness obsession would disappear. Larry sometimes represents the extreme end of fitness culture, which the show can gently mock. Without his character, the show would lose that satirical element. Right. The economic impact would be interesting too. Larry probably supports the beach economy by participating in sports activities, buying equipment, and using fitness facilities. An inactive Larry wouldn't contribute to these businesses, potentially changing how Goo Lagoon operates. SpongeBob's work performance might actually improve. Some of his worst days at the Krusty Krab happen when he's tired from trying to keep up with Larry's exercise routines. Without that physical exhaustion, he might be more focused on his job. The show would lose the gentle giant character type that Larry represents. He's physically imposing, but usually kind and encouraging. An out-of-shape Larry might not have that same gentle confidence that comes from physical strength. Episodes about overcoming challenges would be less inspiring. Larry often faces physical obstacles and conquers them through training and determination. An unfit Larry wouldn't provide examples of pushing through difficulties. The merchandising would be affected too. Larry's muscular design makes for appealing action figures and toys. An out-of-shape version would be less marketable and might not sell as well to kids who admire strong characters. Beach safety would be compromised as well. Larry often acts as an unofficial lifeguard and helps people in trouble because of his swimming ability and strength. An out-of-shape Larry wouldn't be able to perform rescues or keep the beach safe. Most importantly, the show would lose the aspirational quality that Larry provides. He represents the idea that hard work and dedication can lead to impressive results. Kids watching the show see that exercise and healthy living can make you strong and confident. An out-of-shape Larry would fundamentally change the tone and message of many episodes. Instead of promoting activity and self-improvement, his character might accidentally encourage giving up on physical goals. The beach would become less dynamic and exciting without his energetic presence driving the action. The show works because it has characters representing different approaches to life. SpongeBob is enthusiastic but often fails, Patrick is lazy but content, Squidward is grumpy and unsuccessful, and Larry is successful through hard work. Removing the successful athlete archetype would unbalance this character ecosystem and eliminate important lessons about fitness, confidence, and achieving goals through effort. The next What If takes us into helicopter parenting territory. What if SpongeBob's parents were overprotective and lived in Bikini Bottom? SpongeBob's current family setup is perfect for his character. Harold and Margaret SquarePants live far away, so they only appear when there's a crisis or special occasion. They love SpongeBob but give him space to live his own life, make mistakes, and grow as a person. This distance allows SpongeBob to be independent while still having that safety net of parental support when he really needs it. Nature Pants shows this family dynamic perfectly. SpongeBob decides to quit his job and live with the jellyfish in the wild. He gives away all his possessions to his friends and runs off naked to jellyfish fields. The episode works because his parents aren't there to stop him from making this terrible decision. He has to learn from his own mistakes when the jellyfish sting him and he gets covered in poisoned sea urchins. When SpongeBob finally comes home defeated and miserable, his friends throw him a welcome back party. His parents don't show up to lecture him or say, "I told you so." The episode teaches lessons about independence, making bad choices, and learning from failure without parental interference. But what if Harold and Margaret lived next door to SpongeBob and constantly worried about his safety? What if they tried to control every aspect of his life because they thought he was too naive and innocent to take care of himself? This would completely destroy SpongeBob's character and eliminate most of the show's storylines. Overprotective parents living nearby would never let SpongeBob work at a restaurant. They'd probably think the Krusty Krab was too dangerous with its hot grills, sharp spatulas, and grease fires. Harold and Margaret would insist he get a safer office job or maybe just live at home with them forever. The Nature Pants episode couldn't happen at all. The moment SpongeBob started talking about living with jellyfish, his parents would shut that down immediately. They'd probably lock him in his room until he came to his senses. SpongeBob's friendship with Patrick would be heavily monitored. Harold and Margaret would probably think Patrick is a bad influence because he's lazy and gets SpongeBob into trouble. They might forbid SpongeBob from hanging out with him or insist on supervising all their activities. Most of SpongeBob's adventures would be impossible. Overprotective parents wouldn't let him go jellyfishing alone, visit Sandy's dangerous tree dome, or participate in any risky activities. Episodes about exploring, getting lost, or facing challenges would disappear completely. The relationship with Squidward would be different too. Right now, Squidward gets annoyed with SpongeBob but tolerates him as a neighbor. If SpongeBob's parents were constantly around defending their son and complaining about how Squidward treats him, the dynamic would become much more tense. SpongeBob's job performance would probably get worse. Every time Mr. Krabs criticized him or gave him difficult tasks, his parents would probably march into the Krusty Krab to complain. They'd demand special treatment for their precious boy and make work life miserable for everyone. The show would lose its exploration of growing up and becoming independent. SpongeBob represents someone who's technically an adult but still learning how to navigate the world. Overprotective parents would prevent that growth and keep him in a permanent state of childhood dependency. Sandy's relationship with SpongeBob would be complicated by parental interference. Harold and Margaret would probably worry about him spending time with a scientist who does dangerous experiments. They might think her karate lessons are too violent or her extreme sports are too risky. Episodes about SpongeBob learning life lessons would become lectures from his parents instead of natural consequences. Instead of discovering that lying is wrong through his own mistakes, his parents would just tell him not to lie. The educational value would decrease big time. SpongeBob's living situation would probably change. Overprotective parents might insist he move back home where they can watch him all the time. His independence and cool pineapple house would disappear, replaced by his childhood bedroom in his parents' house. The show's comedy would shift from SpongeBob's innocent mistakes to jokes about annoying helicopter parents. While this could be funny sometimes, it would get old fast and appeal more to adults than kids. The show would lose its child-friendly perspective. SpongeBob's confidence would probably suffer under constant parental supervision. Right now, he believes he can do anything because he's been allowed to try and fail on his own. Overprotective parents would constantly point out dangers and limitations, making him anxious and fearful. Gary's role would be much smaller too. Right now, Gary serves as SpongeBob's companion and sometimes voice of reason. With parents around to provide guidance and company, Gary would just be a regular pet instead of an important relationship. The show would miss opportunities to explore themes about trust and letting go. Many episodes teach lessons about independence, responsibility, and learning from mistakes. Overprotective parents would eliminate these themes entirely. Mrs. Puff's driving school would be a complete nightmare. Harold and Margaret would probably blame her for every accident and demand she use special safety equipment or teaching methods just for SpongeBob. They might even try to sue the school or get Mrs. Puff fired. SpongeBob's social development would be severely limited. He'd never learn how to handle conflicts, make decisions, or solve problems on his own because his parents would always step in. This would make him even more childlike and dependent than he already is. The show's message about following your dreams would be much weaker. SpongeBob loves his job and pursues his goals with passion. Overprotective parents would probably try to steer him toward safer careers that they approve of instead of what makes him happy. Episodes about SpongeBob helping others would become rare. His parents would probably worry about him getting involved in other people's problems or putting himself at risk to help friends. His natural generosity and helpfulness would be suppressed by their fears. The physical comedy would be reduced too. Much of SpongeBob's humor comes from him getting into slapstick situations and bouncing back from injuries. Overprotective parents would try to prevent these situations entirely, eliminating a major source of laughs. SpongeBob's relationship with authority figures like Mr. Krabs would be undermined. Instead of learning to respect his boss and follow workplace rules, he'd always have his parents to fall back on when things got difficult. The show would accidentally promote unhealthy family dynamics. Kids watching might think it's normal for parents to control every aspect of their adult children's lives, which could create problems in real families. SpongeBob's dating life would be non-existent. Anytime he showed interest in someone, his parents would probably interfere and scare the person away with background checks and invasive questions. His romantic development would be stunted. The show's pacing would slow down dramatically. Every episode would need time for SpongeBob to ask permission, get lectured by his parents, or deal with their interference. The quick, energetic pace that makes SpongeBob fun would be replaced by boring family meetings. Adventures with Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy would be forbidden. Harold and Margaret would never let SpongeBob hang out with elderly superheroes who get into dangerous situations. These fun episodes would disappear completely. SpongeBob's creativity would suffer under constant supervision. Right now, he comes up with wild ideas and creative solutions because he's free to experiment. Overprotective parents would probably discourage his imagination and push him toward more conventional thinking. The show would lose its celebration of individuality. SpongeBob's weird, unique personality thrives because he's allowed to be himself. Controlling parents would probably try to make him more normal and socially acceptable. Holidays and special events would become stressful instead of fun. His parents would probably overplan everything and worry about every detail instead of letting SpongeBob enjoy himself. The spontaneous joy that makes SpongeBob special would be replaced by anxiety. The show's international appeal would decrease too. Kids around the world relate to SpongeBob because he represents freedom and independence. A version controlled by overprotective parents would be less universal and more culturally specific. Most importantly, SpongeBob's essential character trait, his optimistic independence, would be destroyed. His willingness to try new things, meet new people, and face challenges comes from being allowed to explore the world on his own terms. The show works because SpongeBob represents the perfect balance between childlike wonder and adult responsibility. He has the freedom to make mistakes and learn from them while still having family support when he truly needs it. Overprotective parents living nearby would tip that balance too far toward dependence and control. SpongeBob's adventures drive the entire show. Take away his ability to go exploring, try new things, and occasionally get into trouble, and you lose what makes the character special. He'd become just another sheltered kid instead of the independent, optimistic adult child that fans love. The show teaches kids that it's okay to be different, make mistakes, and learn from failure. Overprotective parents would eliminate these valuable lessons and replace them with fear and dependency. Just a reminder to subscribe to our channel. Now let's move on to our next What If. Now let's talk about a scenario that would shake up the entire show. What if the Krusty Krab and Chum Bucket merged into one restaurant? The rivalry between Mr. Krabs and Plankton is the heart of so many episodes. Mr. Krabs runs the successful Krusty Krab that everyone loves, while Plankton operates the failing Chum Bucket that nobody wants to eat at. This contrast drives most of their conflicts. Plankton is constantly trying to steal the Krabby Patty formula or sabotage Mr. Krabs' business because he's jealous of his success. Welcome to the Chum Bucket shows this dynamic perfectly. Mr. Krabs loses SpongeBob to Plankton in a card game, and SpongeBob has to work at the Chum Bucket. The episode works because the two restaurants are complete opposites. The Krusty Krab is warm, familiar, and homey, while the Chum Bucket is cold, sterile, and scientific. SpongeBob can't cook in Plankton's lab-like kitchen and gets homesick for his real workplace. SpongeBob sings, "This grill is not a home," because the Chum Bucket feels wrong to him. Even when Plankton recreates the Krusty Krab kitchen exactly, SpongeBob still refuses to make Krabby Patties because he doesn't want to work for the enemy. The episode ends with Plankton begging Mr. Krabs to take SpongeBob back because he can't handle him. But what if there was no rivalry? What if Mr. Krabs and Plankton decided to combine their restaurants into one big place? This would completely eliminate the central conflict that drives hundreds of episodes and change the entire show. A merged restaurant would probably be called something like the Krusty Bucket or Chum Crab. The building would need to be much bigger to fit both businesses, or they'd have to tear down both places and build something new. The visual contrast between success and failure would disappear entirely. SpongeBob would work for both bosses at the same time. Instead of being loyal to Mr. Krabs and hating Plankton, he'd have to treat them both as equals. This would eliminate his clear loyalty and make his character more confused. He wouldn't know which boss to please when they disagreed. The menu would be weird too. They'd probably serve both Krabby Patties and Chum, which doesn't make sense since nobody likes Chum. Maybe they'd create new menu items that combine both their styles. The restaurant might have two different sections, one for good food and one for Plankton's experiments. Mr. Krabs and Plankton would have to share profits, which would drive Mr. Krabs crazy. He's used to keeping all the money for himself, so splitting everything 50-50 would feel like losing half his income. Plankton might actually make money for the first time, but it wouldn't feel like a real victory since he'd be sharing credit with his enemy. The workplace dynamics would be completely different. Right now, Squidward works the register while SpongeBob cooks and Mr. Krabs manages. Adding Plankton to the mix would create confusion about who's in charge of what. They'd probably argue constantly about business decisions, work schedules, and employee management. Karen would become a much bigger character since she'd be part of the restaurant's computer system. She might conflict with Mr. Krabs' old-fashioned business methods or try to automate everything. Mr. Krabs would probably hate having a computer telling him how to run his business. The show would lose one of its best sources of comedy. So many jokes come from Plankton's failed schemes and the contrast between his big dreams and his actual abilities. If he was already successful as a partner, these jokes wouldn't work anymore. Episodes about Plankton trying to steal the formula would disappear completely. Why would he steal something he already has access to? The formula would probably be locked in a safe that requires both their approval to open, but there'd be no dramatic tension around protecting it. Customer service would be confusing. Squidward would have to explain why the restaurant serves both delicious Krabby Patties and terrible chum. Customers might get confused about what kind of place it is and whether the food is good or not. The employee hierarchy would be unclear. SpongeBob currently reports to Mr. Krabs, but in a merged restaurant, he might get conflicting orders from both bosses. If Mr. Krabs wanted him to make Krabby Patties while Plankton wanted him to work on experiments, SpongeBob wouldn't know what to do. The show's themes about competition would disappear. The rivalry between the restaurants represents small business competition, with the better product winning out. A merger would eliminate these lessons and make the show less educational about how businesses work. Plankton's character development would stop growing. His constant failures and schemes to beat Mr. Krabs drive his growth as a character. If he was already successful, he wouldn't have the same motivation to change or improve himself. The visual storytelling would be less effective. Right now, you can tell everything about the characters just by looking at their restaurants. The Krusty Krab's rustic nautical theme reflects Mr. Krabs' personality, while the Chum Bucket's high-tech lab look shows Plankton's scientific approach. A merged restaurant would mix these visual cues and make them confusing. Secret Formula episodes would become boring workplace meetings. Instead of dramatic heists and spy missions, Plankton would just ask to see the formula during business hours. The excitement and danger would be replaced by paperwork and boring negotiations. The show would lose its David versus Goliath dynamic. Plankton represents the little guy trying to compete with the big established business, which many viewers find relatable. If he merged with the big guy, this underdog appeal would disappear completely. Episodes about business sabotage wouldn't make sense anymore. Plankton couldn't try to ruin the Krusty Krab because it would hurt his own business too. The competitive tension that creates so many storylines would be gone forever. The friendship between SpongeBob and Patrick might be affected too. Patrick sometimes helps SpongeBob deal with Plankton's schemes, but if Plankton was SpongeBob's boss, Patrick might not know how to react. Their simple friendship would become more complicated and confusing. Mr. Krabs' motivation would change completely. Right now, he's driven by both greed and the need to stay ahead of his competition. Without Plankton as a threat, he might become lazy and boring, which would make him less interesting as a character. The show would need entirely new conflicts to drive episodes. Instead of business rivalry, maybe they'd fight about management styles or profit sharing, but these conflicts would be less visual and exciting than the current schemes and battles. The scheduling would be a nightmare. They'd have to figure out who works when, who gets vacation time, and how to split responsibilities. These boring workplace issues would replace the fun adventures and schemes that currently drive the show. The decoration would be weird too. Would they use the Krusty Krab's wooden ship theme or the Chum Bucket's metal laboratory look? A combination would probably look terrible and not match either character's personality. Staff meetings would be constant battles. Every decision would require both bosses to agree, which would never happen since they hate each other. Simple things like ordering supplies or setting prices would become major arguments. The show's pace would slow down dramatically. Right now, episodes move quickly because there's always conflict and action. A merged restaurant would require lots of talking and negotiating between the bosses, which would be boring to watch. Episodes about health inspectors would be more complicated. The restaurant would probably fail inspections because half of it serves actual food while the other half conducts weird science experiments. The mixing of food service and laboratory work would create safety violations. Most importantly, the show would lose the clear good versus evil dynamic that makes it easy for kids to understand. Mr. Krabs isn't perfect, but he's clearly the good guy compared to scheming Plankton. A partnership would blur these moral lines and make the show more confusing for young viewers. The merger would also eliminate the hope and persistence themes that make Plankton sympathetic. Despite constant failure, he never gives up trying to succeed. If he achieved his goal through a merger, this inspirational message about not giving up would be lost. The show works because the rivalry creates endless story possibilities. Every episode can explore new ways for Plankton to try beating Mr. Krabs or new reasons why his schemes fail. A merged restaurant would eliminate this creative gold mine and force writers to find completely different sources of conflict. The Krusty Krab and Chum Bucket represent two different approaches to business and life. Keeping them separate maintains this important contrast and provides the tension that makes SpongeBob entertaining. Merging them would eliminate one of the show's core dynamics and fundamentally change what makes it special. Here's another big what if. What if Gary could talk like a regular character? Gary's whole thing is being SpongeBob's pet snail who only says meow, but somehow SpongeBob always understands what he means. This creates a unique dynamic where Gary is clearly smart and has opinions, but he communicates through meowing and body language. SpongeBob treats him like a beloved pet while also respecting him as a friend and companion. Gary in Love shows this relationship perfectly. Gary falls in love with a snail named Mary at the snail park, but he can only express his feelings through meowing and visual cues. When SpongeBob finds Gary's drawing of Mary the next morning, he thinks it's a ransom note and that Gary has been kidnapped. The whole episode works because Gary can't just tell SpongeBob, "Hey, I'm in love and went to find my girlfriend." Gary has to communicate his emotions through actions sneaking out of the house, drawing pictures, and meowing sadly when Mary chooses another snail. SpongeBob misinterprets everything because he can't directly ask Gary what's wrong. The comedy comes from this communication gap and the visual storytelling of Gary's romantic adventure. But what if Gary could talk normally like Patrick or Squidward? What if he could have full conversations and express complex thoughts in words? This would completely change his character and eliminate one of the show's most unique relationships. A talking Gary would turn SpongeBob's pet into more of a roommate. Instead of the owner-pet dynamic, they'd be two equals living together. SpongeBob wouldn't need to guess what Gary wants or interpret his meowing. Gary could just ask for food, complain about being bored, or request specific activities. The Gary in Love episode would be totally different with a talking Gary. He could simply tell SpongeBob, "I met a girl snail and I want to go see her." Which would remove the mystery, the misunderstanding about kidnapping, and the visual comedy of Gary trying to communicate through drawings and actions. SpongeBob's caring pet owner side would disappear. Right now, he talks to Gary sweetly, feeds him carefully, and worries about his health and happiness. If Gary could talk back and complain or make demands, SpongeBob might get annoyed with him like he sometimes does with Patrick. The show would lose a major source of physical comedy. So many jokes come from Gary doing cat-like things, hiding when he doesn't want a bath, eating SpongeBob's furniture, or getting into places he shouldn't. If Gary could explain his actions or talk his way out of trouble, these behaviors would be less funny. Gary's mysterious intelligence would become regular intelligence. Right now, Gary seems to understand complex situations, and even gives SpongeBob advice through meowing, but there's something magical about how he knows things. A talking Gary would just be another smart character instead of a wise pet. Episodes about Gary getting lost or into trouble would need different premises. SpongeBob often has to search for Gary or figure out what's wrong with him. If Gary could talk, he could just call for help or explain his problems directly. No more dramatic searches or worried SpongeBob moments. The show would need to give Gary a distinct personality voice. Right now, his personality comes through his actions and expressions. Would talking Gary be sarcastic like Squidward, friendly like SpongeBob, lazy like Patrick? Any choice would limit his character compared to the mysterious pet he is now. Gary's relationship with other characters would change too. Squidward tolerates Gary because he's just a pet, but if Gary could talk and have opinions, Squidward might find him annoying. Patrick might try to have deep conversations with Gary, which could be funny but would change their dynamic completely. The show's exploration of the human-pet bond would disappear. SpongeBob's love for Gary represents the pure affection people have for their pets. If Gary became an equal partner who could argue back, this touching relationship would become just another friendship between cartoon characters. Gary's moments of being cat-like would be less believable. When he acts on instinct or does typical pet behaviors, it's charming because he's an animal. If he could talk, these behaviors would seem weird or forced. Why would a talking snail still chase a ball of yarn or hide under the couch? Episodes where Gary saves the day would be less impressive. Right now, when Gary helps solve problems or rescues SpongeBob, it shows his loyalty and intelligence without words. A talking Gary helping out would be expected rather than touching. The heroic pet angle would be lost. The voice acting would be tricky too. Gary's meowing is performed by Tom Kenny in a specific way that shows emotion without words. A talking Gary would need a completely different voice that fits his character, and any choice would change how viewers see him. Would he sound young or old, smart or simple? Gary's diet and lifestyle would become more complicated. Right now, SpongeBob feeds Gary snail food and treats him like a pet. If Gary could talk, he might have preferences, complaints about his food, or demands for different treatment. I don't want snail food today, I want pizza. The show would lose the universal appeal of pet ownership. Almost everyone can relate to having a pet who can't talk but seems to understand everything. A talking Gary would be more like a fantasy creature than a relatable pet that kids and adults can connect with. Gary's wisdom would become regular advice. Right now, when Gary meows in response to SpongeBob's problems, viewers can imagine he's giving wise counsel. If he could actually speak, his advice would be judged like any other character's opinions, instead of seeming mysteriously insightful. Episodes about communication and understanding would disappear. Many touching moments come from SpongeBob and Gary figuring out how to communicate despite the language barrier. This theme would be lost if they could just talk normally, like any two friends. Gary's independence would change too. Right now, he makes his own decisions, and sometimes ignores SpongeBob's commands, which is realistic pet behavior. A talking Gary would need to justify his choices or argue about them, making him less authentically pet-like. The show's use of visual storytelling would decrease. Gary episodes often rely on showing rather than telling, which creates more engaging television. Talking Gary would lead to more talking and explanation instead of visual comedy and physical gags. Gary's role as SpongeBob's conscience would become more obvious. Right now, Gary sometimes seems to guide SpongeBob toward better decisions through subtle actions. If he could talk, this guidance would be direct advice rather than gentle influence that viewers have to interpret. The surprise factor would be eliminated too. Part of Gary's charm is that you never know what he's thinking or what he'll do next. A talking Gary would explain his plans and remove the mystery that makes him interesting. Gary's emotional moments would be less powerful. When Gary shows sadness, love, or concern through his actions and expressions, it feels pure and genuine. If he could explain his feelings in words, these moments might feel less authentic and more like regular dialogue. The show would need to address why Gary could suddenly talk. This would require explanation episodes or backstory that might make things too complicated for the simple, magical world of SpongeBob. Kids don't want to think about why things work, they just want to enjoy them. Gary's meowing also creates comedy through misunderstanding. Sometimes SpongeBob thinks Gary wants one thing when he actually wants something else. This leads to funny situations that wouldn't happen if Gary could just say what he wanted clearly. The show would lose its exploration of different types of intelligence. Gary shows that you can be smart and wise without using words. A talking Gary would just be another character who shows intelligence through speech, like everyone else. Bath time episodes would be completely different. Right now, Gary hiding from baths is funny because he acts like a real pet. If he could talk, he'd just argue with SpongeBob about why he doesn't want to get clean, which would be less amusing. The relationship between Gary and other pets in the show would change. Right now, all the snails communicate through meowing, which creates a sense of species consistency. If only Gary could talk, he'd be different from other snails for no clear reason. Gary's loyalty would seem less special too. When pets show loyalty without being able to talk, it feels pure and unconditional. A talking Gary's loyalty would come with explanations and conditions, making it seem more calculated than heartfelt. Most importantly, Gary represents the idea that love and communication don't always need words. His relationship with SpongeBob shows that deep bonds can exist through actions, care, and understanding. Making Gary talk would eliminate this beautiful message about non-verbal connection. The show works because Gary is the perfect pet, smart enough to be interesting, loyal enough to be lovable, but still animal enough to be authentic. He bridges the gap between realistic pet ownership and cartoon fantasy. Giving him speech would push him too far into the fantasy realm and lose the relatability that makes him special. Gary's meowing creates a unique type of character interaction that doesn't exist anywhere else in animation. It allows for comedy, emotion, and storytelling that would be impossible with a regular talking character. Changing this would eliminate one of SpongeBob's most distinctive and charming elements that has made him beloved for decades. Before I tell you about a scenario that is impossible to happen, subscribe to our channel. Let's dive into another massive change. What if Patrick actually got a girlfriend? Patrick's whole character is built around being the lazy, single best friend who has no responsibilities beyond hanging out with SpongeBob. He lives under a rock, sleeps most of the day, and his biggest concerns are usually food or simple activities. Patrick represents the carefree bachelor lifestyle. Valentine's Day shows Patrick's relationship status perfectly. The episode is all about SpongeBob trying to give Patrick the perfect Valentine's gift, a chocolate hot air balloon. Patrick gets super excited about receiving a present and goes completely crazy when he thinks he's only getting a handshake instead of something special. He destroys the entire carnival in a jealous rage because everyone else got better gifts from SpongeBob. The episode works because Patrick is desperate for attention and love, but he has no romantic partner to celebrate with. His only Valentine's Day interaction is with his best friend SpongeBob. When Patrick sees other people getting roses, chocolates, and bikes from SpongeBob, while he only gets a handshake, he loses his mind and goes on a rampage. The comedy comes from Patrick being so lonely and attention-starved that he expects his best friend to fill that romantic void. But what if Patrick had a girlfriend who gave him Valentine's gifts? What if he had someone who loved him and wanted to spend the holiday with him? This would completely change his character and get rid of his desperate need for SpongeBob's attention. A girlfriend would give Patrick actual responsibilities for the first time. He'd have to remember anniversaries, plan dates, and think about someone other than himself. Right now, Patrick's biggest decision is whether to sleep for 12 hours or 14 hours. Having a girlfriend would force him to be more organized and considerate. The Valentine's Day episode would be totally different with Patrick having a girlfriend. Instead of being excited about SpongeBob's gift, Patrick would probably be busy planning something romantic for his girlfriend. He might even forget about SpongeBob entirely, which would flip the jealousy thing completely. SpongeBob's role in Patrick's life would get much smaller. Right now, SpongeBob is Patrick's main source of entertainment, adventure, and social interaction. A girlfriend would replace most of those functions, leaving SpongeBob feeling left out and replaced. Patrick's lazy lifestyle would have to change. Girlfriends usually expect their boyfriends to have some goals, be clean, and have basic life skills. Patrick would need to clean his rock house, maybe get a job, and start taking better care of himself. His carefree attitude would disappear. Episodes about Patrick being dumb would be less funny. Right now, his stupidity is charming because it only affects him and SpongeBob, but if Patrick's dumbness hurt his girlfriend or ruined their relationship, it would seem mean instead of funny. The show would lose Patrick as the always available friend character. SpongeBob currently can always count on Patrick being free to hang out because Patrick has nothing else to do. With a girlfriend, Patrick would have other priorities and wouldn't always be available for adventures. Patrick's selfishness would become a bigger problem. His current self-centered behavior is okay because he mostly just ignores SpongeBob or acts lazy. But if he treated a girlfriend the same way, he'd seem like a terrible boyfriend instead of a lovable goofball. The friendship between SpongeBob and Patrick would have to make room for a third person. Their simple friendship would become more complicated with Patrick's girlfriend, potentially causing jealousy, scheduling conflicts, and divided loyalties. Patrick's eating habits would need to change too. He currently eats whatever he wants, whenever he wants, often in gross ways. A girlfriend might expect him to have better table manners and eat healthier foods, which would change a lot of food-related comedy. The show would need to create a girlfriend character who could put up with Patrick's lifestyle. She'd either have to be as lazy and dumb as he is, or she'd have to be super patient and understanding. Either choice would create new character dynamics, but might not be as funny as Patrick's solo act. Episodes about Patrick learning basic life skills would disappear. Part of his charm is that he's completely helpless with normal adult tasks. A girlfriend would either teach him these skills or do them for him, getting rid of that source of comedy. Patrick's rock house would need major upgrades. Right now, it's basically empty because Patrick doesn't need much. A girlfriend would probably want furniture, decorations, and basic stuff to make it livable, which would change the visual representation of Patrick's simple lifestyle. The show would have to address what Patrick's girlfriend sees in him. Patrick doesn't have a job, barely has possessions, and shows little ambition. The show would need to either give Patrick more attractive qualities or create a girlfriend with very low standards. Patrick's relationship with other characters would change too. Squidward puts up with Patrick partly because Patrick is SpongeBob's problem, not his. But if Patrick had a girlfriend who also annoyed Squidward, the neighbor situation would become more strained. Holiday episodes would focus more on Patrick's romantic relationship than his friendship with SpongeBob. Valentine's Day, anniversaries, and other romantic occasions would become couple activities instead of friend activities. Patrick's emotional outbursts would be less acceptable. Right now, when Patrick gets angry or jealous, it's seen as childish but harmless. If he had those same outbursts around a girlfriend, he'd seem mean or crazy instead of just immature. The show's exploration of male friendship would be weakened. Patrick and SpongeBob represent the idea that adult men can have close, caring friendships. Adding a girlfriend would suggest that romantic relationships are more important than friendships. Patrick's mysterious unemployment would become a bigger issue. Right now, nobody questions why Patrick doesn't work because he's just a simple character. A girlfriend might pressure him to get a job or contribute money, which would make his carefree image more complicated. The girlfriend would need her own personality and storylines. She couldn't just exist to be Patrick's girlfriend, she'd need to be interesting enough to deserve screen time. This would reduce the focus on the core SpongeBob-Patrick friendship. Patrick's advice to SpongeBob about relationships would become more realistic but less funny. Right now, Patrick gives terrible relationship advice because he has no experience. With a girlfriend, his advice might actually be helpful, but wouldn't create the same funny situations. The show would have to deal with relationship drama like fights, breakups, and makeups. These storylines might be too grown up or complex for SpongeBob's target audience and would change the show's innocent tone. Patrick's loyalty to SpongeBob would be split. Right now, SpongeBob is clearly Patrick's #1 priority. A girlfriend would rightfully expect to be his priority, which would make him less available for SpongeBob's adventures and schemes. The show would lose some of its childlike innocence. Patrick represents the idea that you can be happy just playing around and not worrying about adult stuff. A girlfriend would force him into the grown-up world of relationships, compromise, and responsibility. Patrick's eating contest with SpongeBob would probably end. Most girlfriends wouldn't want to watch their boyfriend stuff his face with ice cream or compete in gross eating challenges. These fun bonding moments between the friends would disappear. Bath time and hygiene episodes would be different too. Right now, Patrick's poor hygiene is just a funny character trait. With a girlfriend, his lack of cleanliness would become a relationship issue rather than just a joke. The girlfriend would also highlight how weird SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship really is. Most adults their age are focused on romantic relationships, careers, and building families. Having Patrick get a girlfriend would make SpongeBob seem more childish and strange for still putting friendship first. Patrick's house parties and sleepovers with SpongeBob would become awkward. A girlfriend would probably want alone time with Patrick and might not appreciate SpongeBob always being around. The spontaneous hangouts that drive many episodes would disappear. Episodes where Patrick acts like a pet or follows SpongeBob around would seem weird if he had a girlfriend. Right now, Patrick's dog-like loyalty to SpongeBob is endearing, but it would be concerning if he ignored his girlfriend to chase after SpongeBob. The show would need to explain why Patrick's girlfriend doesn't appear in episodes where she logically should be present. If they're dating, she should be at parties, holidays, and major events, which would change the cast dynamics of many episodes. Most importantly, Patrick's role as SpongeBob's loyal sidekick would be compromised. His girlfriend would rightfully expect to be his priority, which would make him less available for SpongeBob's adventures and schemes. The show works because Patrick represents freedom from adult responsibilities. He shows that you can be happy with very little and that simple pleasures are enough. Adding a girlfriend would force him into the adult world of relationships, compromise, and responsibility. The Valentine's Day episode specifically shows why Patrick needs to stay single. His desperate need for love and attention creates the conflict that drives the story. If he already had someone who loved him, there'd be no reason for him to care so much about SpongeBob's gift or get jealous of other people's presents. Patrick getting a girlfriend would change what makes him Patrick, the carefree, loyal, simple friend who's always available for whatever adventure SpongeBob dreams up next. The show's heart is the friendship between these two characters, and adding romantic complications would mess with that special bond. Finally, let's talk about what if Mr. Krabs actually lost all his money. Mr. Krabs' entire identity revolves around being rich and making money. He's the greedy boss who counts every penny, charges his employees for breathing, and would probably sell his own shell if the price was right. Money is literally who he is as a person. His whole personality, his business, and his relationships are built around his love of cash. Clams shows this obsession perfectly. When Mr. Krabs earns his millionth dollar at the Krusty Krab, he's so excited that he takes SpongeBob and Squidward on a reward trip that turns out to be cheap clam fishing. During the trip, SpongeBob accidentally hooks Mr. Krabs' precious millionth dollar and casts it into the water, where a giant clam eats it. Mr. Krabs completely loses his mind and becomes obsessed with getting that $1 back. He keeps them on the boat for 3 days, throws away all their food except one sandwich as a reward, and eventually uses SpongeBob and Squidward as live bait to catch the clam. The episode shows that losing just $1, even though he has 999,999 others, drives Mr. Krabs to complete insanity. He literally trades most of his body to the clam just to get that single dollar back. But what if Mr. Krabs lost everything? What if some disaster wiped out all his money, his restaurant, and his entire fortune? This would completely destroy his character and create the biggest change in SpongeBob history. A broke Mr. Krabs would probably have a complete mental breakdown that makes the Clams episode look tame. If losing $1 made him crazy enough to use his employees as bait, losing everything would probably put him in a mental hospital. He'd be crying, screaming, and pulling out his eye stalks. The Krusty Krab would shut down immediately. Without money to pay rent, buy ingredients, or maintain the building, Mr. Krabs would have to close the restaurant. SpongeBob would lose his dream job and his life's purpose. The whole foundation of the show would collapse. SpongeBob would be heartbroken beyond belief. His job at the Krusty Krab is his passion, his identity, and his reason for getting up every morning. Seeing his beloved workplace shut down would devastate him. He'd probably spend days crying and trying to convince Mr. Krabs to reopen somehow. Squidward would initially be happy about not having to work anymore, but he'd quickly realize he has no income. Without his cashier job, he couldn't afford his house, his clarinet, or his art supplies. He'd probably have to move back in with his parents or find a new job, which would make him miserable in different ways. Plankton would be thrilled at first. With the Krusty Krab gone, the Chum Bucket would be the only restaurant in town, but he'd quickly realize that people still don't want to eat chum, and without competition from the Krusty Krab, he'd have no motivation to improve his food or schemes. Mr. Krabs would probably become desperate enough to do anything for money. He might try to get a job working for someone else, which would be humiliating for someone who's used to being the boss. Can you imagine Mr. Krabs flipping burgers at the Chum Bucket for minimum wage? The whole economic system of Bikini Bottom would be disrupted. The Krusty Krab employs people and brings customers to the area. Without it, other businesses would suffer too. The town might go into an economic depression. Pearl would be devastated. She's used to her dad being rich and giving her money for shopping and activities. Suddenly being poor would be a huge shock for a teenage whale who's used to getting whatever she wants. She might have to get a job or move in with friends. Mr. Krabs' relationship with Mrs. Puff would probably end. Their romance is partly based on him being a successful businessman. A broke, desperate Mr. Krabs would be much less attractive, and Mrs. Puff might not want to deal with his financial problems. The character would probably become bitter and angry instead of just greedy. Right now, Mr. Krabs is happy because he has money. Without it, he'd be miserable all the time. He might blame SpongeBob, Squidward, or anyone else for his problems instead of taking responsibility. SpongeBob might try to help Mr. Krabs get back on his feet, but his optimism would be tested like never before. Seeing his boss and father figure completely broken would challenge SpongeBob's belief that everything works out in the end. The show would lose its workplace comedy element. So many episodes take place at the Krusty Krab or involve work situations. Without the restaurant, the writers would need completely different settings and storylines. Mr. Krabs might become a completely different person. His greed, while annoying, also makes him ambitious and hardworking. Without money as motivation, he might become lazy and give up on life entirely. The energetic, scheming Mr. Krabs could turn into a depressed shell of his former self. Episodes about Mr. Krabs' cheap behavior would disappear. His penny-pinching ways are funny because he has money but chooses not to spend it. If he was actually poor, being cheap wouldn't be funny, it would just be sad and necessary. The power dynamic between characters would shift completely. Right now, Mr. Krabs is the authority figure who makes decisions and gives orders. Without money or a business, he'd lose that power and might become dependent on others for help. SpongeBob's innocent view of the world would be challenged. He's always seen hard work and positivity as the solution to problems. But watching Mr. Krabs lose everything despite working hard might make SpongeBob question his beliefs about fairness and justice. The show's themes about the American dream would become much darker. Mr. Krabs represents the idea that anyone can succeed through hard work. If he lost everything, it would suggest that success isn't guaranteed and that people can lose their achievements through bad luck or circumstances beyond their control. Mr. Krabs might become jealous and resentful of other successful people. Instead of being inspired by wealth, he might hate anyone who has what he used to have. This would make him a much less likable character. The community's respect for Mr. Krabs would disappear. Right now, people look up to him as a successful businessman. A broke Mr. Krabs would lose that social status and might be looked down upon or pitied instead. Episodes about competition between the Krusty Krab and Chum Bucket would be impossible. The rivalry that drives many storylines would be gone, and the show would lose one of its main sources of conflict. Mr. Krabs might have to swallow his pride and ask for help, which would be extremely difficult for someone as proud as he is. Seeing him beg for money or favors would be heartbreaking and change how viewers see him. The show's balance between comedy and heart would shift toward being more depressing. While SpongeBob episodes can be sad, they usually end on a positive note. A permanently broke Mr. Krabs would create a constant undercurrent of sadness that would be hard to overcome. Most importantly, Mr. Krabs' role as a mentor figure to SpongeBob would be compromised. SpongeBob looks up to his boss and wants to make him proud. A defeated, broken Mr. Krabs couldn't provide the guidance and leadership that SpongeBob needs. The Clams episode shows us exactly how Mr. Krabs reacts to losing money with complete madness and obsession. Losing everything would multiply that reaction by 1,000 and create a character who's too damaged and desperate to be the funny, greedy boss we know and love. Mr. Krabs needs his money because it's the foundation of his entire personality and self-worth. Take that away, and you'd have a completely different character and a completely different show. That's the end of today's video. Be sure to subscribe to our channel if you enjoy your content, and I'll see you in the next one.